Hey guys, how are you all? Welcome back to my channel. Today we will see what if Konoha creates invisible weapons for Naruto. If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments. Sarutobi Hiruzen, the third Hokage, the professor, and the rock that currently held this village together, felt terrible. His hand trembled, holding within it his partially tobacco-filled pipe that dangled loosely in between his fingers. Ash fell to the oak of his table and he stared at it bitterly. Ash, a remnant of what something one was. In a way, it was the village. As of now, that was all that the village was. A remnant. Something had happened to his people. They had seen the light, a bad light. It had blinded them severely. The early, crepuscular rays of dawn pierced the cloud tops, looking much like little silver spears protruding from the border of heaven. In his chair, which had wheels, a feature he always enjoyed, he spun around to face the window, to face the clouds. Kami, what have I done? It wasn't really all his fault though. The village council did most of this. They finally got what they wanted. He couldn't stop them either, so why was he even the Hokage? Was his status just a title? Was the Hokage just the puppet controlled by the dangerous hands of the village council? Dismayed, he brought one hand up to massage his forehead, rubbing softly to soothe the migraine already forming. Yes, they finally got what they wanted. Uzumaki Naruto would now be used as a soldier, a weapon. And if he didn't comply, they would see to it that the boy lost more than he could ever recover from. This all started around the Chunin exams. His upsetting display of combat certainly pleased the crowd, outwardly it did, but things were much more covert. On the inside, people looked at him with contempt. It started off as adulation, but then people began to talk, people began to say things. No way, he must have cheated, they said. He isn't legit, that fight was rigged, they said. It all led to the simple and false dogma, that Hyuga Neji should have won. But that was only milestone number 1. Number 2 came after Naruto's victory over Sabaku no Gaara, the one-tailed Jinchuriki. It was less known than Naruto's altercation with Neji, thankfully, but it still hurt the boy's reputation. But what really hurt the boy was the one upsetting, and completely disturbing, victory that Naruto had attained. His match against Uchiha Sasuke, the sole survivor of the Uchiha clan. Sarutobi remembered the scene vividly. He remembered it in such a way that every single time he thought about it would send a chill traveling down his spine. If he remembered clearly, oh, and he did. Naruto literally dragged Sasuke's brutalized body back to Konoha, bloodied and scarred, by the ankles. Two grotesque gray wings that looked disturbingly like hands sprouted from Sasuke's back, and by what he'd seen, Naruto had cruelly broken those hands. The blood was abundant, leaking and pouring from the open raw wound in Naruto's stomach that exposed bulging intestines for the world to gaze at in disgust. Sasuke's injury was worse. Naruto had gotten lucky. The damage that Sasuke had inflicted on him, in comparison to what he'd done, was subpar by far. Sarutobi shuddered, expurgating his mind of the thought. The door to his rear swayed open with a loud groan, ensued by the sound of footsteps on a dry wood floor. He simply leaned back further into his chair, letting it swallow him. That's right, his status really was just a title, thanks to Orochimaru. He was the Hokage, but he had not the physical prowess to show it, not anymore. He was a shell of his former self, far ahead of his own stream of time. The Hokage had been damaged and handicapped, internally, by the likes of Orochimaru. Just like the village, he was a remnant. Are you ready for your medicine, Hokage-sama? Later, give me a few moments to myself. Come back in 2 minutes. Yes, Hokage-sama, the feminine voice said sweetly. What he heard next was the door creaking to a close once more. He shouldn't have survived that fight with Orochimaru. Really, he should be dead right now. Yet, he lived. In the end, he couldn't go through with it, and the Reaper death seal was not applied, at least not to him. Beneath his robes, he produced a small scroll with wrinkles that rippled like the sand in a desert. His eyes went back up to the sky. Enma, you were a good comrade and an even better friend. His wrinkled skin tightened around his fingers as he squeezed the scroll in his shaky grip. No, it wasn't him who had performed the Shikifuin, it was Enma, the Monkey King and one of the few summons ever capable of performing such an act. He was truly great, and now he was gone. Forever. All Sarutobi had now was the scroll that he'd signed his name in when he made the contract with Enma. As of now, Anbu were probably on their way to Naruto's home, he would know. He gave the order himself, shamefully and reluctantly. Now Naruto would be taken away, but that didn't explain why the ends of Sarutobi Hiruzen's lips were curling upward. Why was he smiling? Why was he happy? Because, despite him being just the Hokage, the fact of the matter was that he was the Hokage. He had his ways and he had connections. And powerful ones too. Naruto would be okay. As for him, however, his time was up. He needed a replacement, and an aspirant. The Hokage closed his eyes, the smile still ruling his face. His 2 minutes were up. Okay, I'm ready for my medicine now. It happened pretty fast, too fast for Naruto in his opinion, and boy, it was terrifying. One moment he was sprawled out all over his bed having one of the best dreams in his life, and the next minute, there was a bag over his head. His window had been left open. That was his first mistake. It allowed for the Anbu member to glide easily through and land on his burnished wood flooring without a sound. For a moment the monkey-masked Anbu loomed over Naruto, taking in the boy's unorthodox sleeping mannerisms with high levels of disgust. Most people, when subject to sleeping habits, sucked their thumbs. This blonde kid on the other hand, he could suck on his own toe. Gross. The Anbu placed one hand on his hip, leaning ever so slightly to the left and shaking his head. This child is our weapon, Konoha, you have fallen. Even our Jinchuriki looks like a chump. The white of his mask effectively hid the hanging bottom lip and twitching eyebrow. How could the guy even sleep like that? Naruto was curled in a ball, his right foot bent so that his foot loomed close to his lips. How? I can't bear to see this, he said, producing a small, empty, potato sack. And on we go. His mission was simple: retrieve the kid, bring him to HQ, and debrief. Not much work, but he couldn't help but feel that this was wrong. He was kidnapping someone, a child. This wasn't some innocuous act, rather this was crime. Taking him, casting him into the life that he was surely going to hate, something like that was mentally scarring, especially on a child. But orders were orders. Rise and shine, the Anbu cried out, well mentally. Naruto's eyes snapped open, the rush of shock running through his system pried them open. He only had a few moments to descry the monkey mask before his vision was invaded by the plain brown potato sack sliding over his face. What the fuck was going on? The surprise, the fear, the anxiety running through him, he could feel it forcing the sound from his lungs. When the scream came, it was immediately suppressed by an invisible hand slapping his mouth shut. The hand applied pressure and he felt his head being pushed back until it collided with the floor. Don't struggle. He heard it, but he didn't listen. Hell no, he would never listen. Naruto flailed, thrashing about wildly in a blind swinging of arms and legs. One of his arms met resistance, the very firm grip of a trained Anbu. Air rushed from his lungs in the form of a yell as that arm was bent back, painfully, very painfully, and placed behind his back. How the hell did this happen? One moment he was sleeping peacefully, dreaming about eating some ramen, and the next he was getting attacked and tied by some weirdo monkey-masked Anbu. Naruto was on his belly. Through the sack on his head he could feel the soft bed sheets collide with his face when the Anbu smashed his face against his own bed. What the fuck? Let me go. Shit, the sack stinks. Then he heard the voice, closer, no, almost right beside his ear. Naruto froze from the chill of killer intent that washed over him. Paralyzing. Are you ready, brat? The man said in a shaky, almost crazed voice. He was breathing pretty harshly. You're going to be just like me, alright? You are to be our little weapon from now on. The Hokage has protected you this far, but after the scars Orochimaru left him with, he won't be a problem. Are you ready, boy? Are you ready, Kyuubi? The word tore through, crashed through, shattered his very being. It hurt to be called that. Kyuubi, he wasn't the monster. But most people didn't see it that way. To them there was no such thing as a container. He was the Kyuubi incarnate and there was nothing else to it. Naruto gritted his teeth, balling his fist until his knuckles turned white. For a moment he was devoid of any sound and laid there, simply, he didn't move at all. Ah, did I? Crash. What the fuck? Naruto perked up, his head swiveling in every direction, desperately trying to figure out what happened. He knew one thing. Someone had just crashed through his window, and seeing as how he did not feel the Anbu's hand on his head anymore, that person had taken the Anbu out as well. That was good, somebody strong had come to help him. Hey, get this thing off my head. Hello. Hell. As the bag was removed, the musty smell receded and the first taste of fresh air that hit his tongue was refreshing. A kunai slid in between his palms and sliced the rope binding him. Then Naruto heard something, a sound so familiar that it brought a smile to his face. A frog's croak. The now jovial boy's head whipped around, an ear-to-ear smile covering his visage. He knew it, he could tell who it was just by the croak. The light from the sun played against the long, lunar white hair of his mentor, making it coruscate with such intensity that Naruto actually wanted to shield his eyes. To his left, unconscious on the floor, was the previously monkey-masked Anbu. Previously, because during his brisk takedown Jiraiya had demasked the poor unfortunate Anbu. Rather, Jiraiya's summon had taken off the man's mask. For a moment, Naruto observed his assailant's features: black hair, no facial hair, muscular jaw. He scoffed, for such shady people, if you went underneath the mask, Anbu were pretty nondescript. His blue eyes, which gleamed with fear and curiosity, shifted up toward the large green toad mottled with brown spots, watching carefully as it played happily, cradling the Anbu's plain monkey mask with its elongated, slimy, toad tongue that glistened with saliva. Naruto took a moment, and back to his sensei. Ero Sennin, what's going on? Jiraiya forced out a smile. Visibly he twitched from Naruto's nickname for him. He got serious once more. No time, Naruto-kun, we're going on a little trip. Don't ask any questions right now, just pack some clothes. Hesitantly Naruto nodded. He really wanted to know just what the hell was happening, but after the pother that had just occurred, he was reluctant to even utter a single word. So he merely nodded, a quick bob of his head, and said, "Hi, Jiraiya-sensei. About time you stopped with the nickname." Jiraiya mused. "Oh my bad, Ero Sennin." Jiraiya grimaced, eliciting a smile from Naruto. "Okay, Naruto, say goodbye to Konoha, for good." Naruto woke up with a jolt. His face was glazed over with a cold sweat. A cool breeze swept over him, chilling his face. His skin tightened after he gave himself a few well-deserved slaps. He should not have been dreaming, not about the past at least. That happened about 3 years ago, the one life-changing decision that had changed his life forever. The moon cast a milky white glow onto the forest floor, sending singly a cylindrical shaft of bright light shining onto his face. Underneath him, the trees buzzed with the sounds of myriad insects bombinating as they always did. Fireflies gamboled playfully, looking like living cinders from a bonfire. Every few seconds one would fly overhead, lighting up just as it buzzed by his field of vision. He wasn't in Konoha anymore, the reason, he knew not. But what he did know was that if he did stay in the village he would have been used as someone's weapon, the village council perhaps? Jiraiya wouldn't tell him. Although only people as cold and manipulative as those withered old war hawks would have been able to find a good enough reason to override the Hokage's will. In his opinion he wasn't a missing nin. Missing wasn't the right word for it, missing nin were renegades. And he was not. Rather he labeled himself as a fugitive nin. He was definitely on the run, from more than one thing. There was Konoha of course, but then there was also Akatsuki. They were a big pain in the rear. What was Naruto doing now? Well, that was a good question, a very good question. But you shouldn't be asking him, he was the wrong person. He didn't even know what he was doing, he considered himself an empty being guided only by an unnatural force. He peered out of his perch in a tree, and smiled. About a mile away, something shot up into the sky, whistling loudly as it did. As the coarse whistling came to its end and the object reached its apex, the sky literally exploded with a mass of red and blue. 2 more objects shot up, popping in the sky with the same amount of light and color as the last. The only difference was that these ones gave off yellows and greens. Naruto's smile grew wider, the fireworks had begun. Now was his chance. He dropped to the floor silently, his feet making little to no sound at all against the leaves. He could see the village across the large clearing. That was the only way to enter, by crossing that rocky clearing, and this was his best time to do it. Pouring slight chakra into his legs he glided across the slightly sodden grass and damp gravel, heading for the main gate of his target's village. Truthfully, Kumogakure no Sato was ruled by an idiot. During a festival, who completely let their guard down. Intel said that during this day, Kumo's nin had been excused from duty in order to enjoy the good times this festival had to offer. The Festival of the Ascending Cloud. A day handpicked in order to celebrate the growth of Kumo's economy. It was a stupid thing to celebrate. But Naruto was no idiot. It may be stupid in his opinion. It was also a great way to attract predators like him. The nin had off, however, that doesn't mean that if they spotted an intruder they wouldn't act. He had to think about it. This festival made things harder. Now he would have to pick out and identify shinobi from civilians, if necessary. What a drag. He smiled. The memory of his old comrade and buddy Nara Shikamaru came flooding back to him. Okay. Maybe he missed his old life. Just a little bit. The gate came rushing beneath him as he sailed over it, effortlessly, landing on the side of a stray building without a sound. Beside him a window was open, the sound of a crying baby erupting outward. He took a little peek, just enough to see the attractive blonde woman slipping her nipple into her wailing baby's mouth. Moving his head away, he moved up to the roof where he lay on his back. For a moment he watched the lights, as they illuminated the sky in explosions of color. Despite the heavy cloud cover, it was beautiful. He sighed and sat up. He knew of his target. He could say targets, but one person was good enough for now. Actually, one person was all that he could handle. The first person was on par, if not slightly weaker than he, but the second. He was on an entirely different scale in terms of raw harnessed power. The surprising thing was, he actually knew how to harness it. It was true. Kumo had not one but two inhumanely proficient Jinchuriki. It was a shame that he would only be approaching one. He smiled. Ni Yugito. Where are you? She was his target. He produced a scroll from his pack, unfurling it with celerity and quickly absorbed its contents. Ni Yugito. 15 years old, hair color. He looked up at his own hair, blonde. Birthday. July 24th. Great, he said. She's older than me by a couple months. Can't let that go to her head. Blood type. A and currently the two-tailed Jinchuriki. Naruto paused. That was a 7-tail difference between them. This shouldn't have been too hard, right? Enough of that, he'd have to formulate a plan. He needed a way to find her, but for now, he'd enjoy the fireworks, only for a bit though. Ni Yugito's eyes snapped open, peering through the darkness that only she could see in. That was strange. She felt something. Something odd about the village? She didn't know, but there was something that was beginning to put her off edge. A certain distinct feeling that she knew all too well, the feeling of kinship. She knew that was it, it had to have been it. It was the same feeling that she always felt whenever she was near Killer B, despite his horribly off-tune mannerisms. It was something that just came with being what she was, a container. It was only natural that she would feel detached from the rest of society whenever her kind was around. But Killer B wasn't in the village. If she remembered, he went on tour. He called it that at least. Yugito sat up. What the fuck is going on? She said. The moonlight dug through the open window, shining a square-shaped pillar of light onto her floor. Ni-sama, are you alright? A voice came from outside the door. She sighed, her personal guard. The only nin who wasn't off duty today. And the only nin who wouldn't leave her alone. Yes, she responded flatly, stretching her arms in a wide arch. Yusu. Ayumi. What was your name again? Why Yusuke? Ma'am? His voice sounded muffled through the door. It was shaky as well. Fear perhaps? Why aren't you enjoying the festival today? B. Because it is my job to protect you, always. I see, she responded, elegantly standing and striding over to the door, devoid of any sound. She opened the door, revealing the average-height Chunin, black hair, brown eyes, normal guy. Easily manipulated. And what if I said I don't need protection? What then, He made a slight movement back. I would still protect you. Yugito smiled, her pearly whites displaying a pair of slightly sharpened canines, a useful advantage that came with her disability, and moved her face in closer. Would you risk your life for a monster child like me? He nodded twice. Yasuke's fear, she could feel it, his apprehensiveness prominent. That fact that he was scared was as noticeable as a kunai blade protruding from a dead man's head. The small bit of perspiration on his upper lip was an indicator, his velleity. She simply ate it up, lapping it like a cat would milk. Fear was delicious in her opinion. It was the ultimate sustenance, that should have kept every Jinchuriki going. Maybe she was wrong, maybe fear was bad. Maybe she was just a twisted 15-year-old girl, because from what she'd heard, every other person like her hated the way their village treated her. Whereas, she loved it. But she had to give it to him. His sense of duty was astounding, either that or his love of money. The shinobi scuttlebutt was that if you guarded the demon you got triple the pay. Smart man, this was a day of celebration. She couldn't kill him today. I will guard you with my life. He blurted, his straightened fingers moving to his forehead in a salute. Yugito simply giggled, rather girlishly, rare for her. You're silly, you know that? Saluting to a teenage girl like me, but thanks, I appreciate it, sort of. But I really do wish you would go out and enjoy yourself, she said before she slipped back into her room. The door clicked closed. Yusuke released his breath, sliding with his back against the hallway wall to the floor. He looked up, staring at the buzzing incandescent light, his breath was strained. Man, she scares me. He muttered softly, almost inaudibly. What was that? Yugito's voice came from the inside of her room. Nothing at all. Oh, okay. Inside, Yugito had rested herself against the windowsill, the milky moonlight reflecting of the silk of her nightgown. She didn't know why she was feeling this, but the simple thought of an answer was beginning to worry her, minutely. There was a possibility, a small, no microscopic possibility that what she was thinking was correct. But maybe, just maybe, there may have been another Jinchuriki in the village. Yugito closed one eye, gazing at the moon, and raised her index finger and thumb, pinching the air, as if to grab the moon from her window and crush in between her fingers' grasp. Like a grape. But then a beetle flew into her room, promptly drawing her attention away from the moon's partially refulgent glow. The beetle was fast and fun. Chase Able was the phrase. Come back here, NYA. She said as she pawed and swiped at it. That's when she stopped. Wow, I really am becoming a cat. Naruto had chosen to slip off the roof where he'd been resting halfway through the fireworks and drop down into an alleyway. He landed next to the dumpster, quickly recoiling from the foul smell. Rotting, biodegradable crap was not his top choice of smells. He made a ram seal, but his hand stopped midway. He'd almost forgotten during the blindingly spectacular fireworks display. He couldn't use his chakra here. Not because he would be sensed by enemy nin, no, that was no problem. Despite the festival, nin still used their chakra, though only sparingly. The problem was that he'd be detected by his target. If anyone else felt him, so be it, but with Yugito it was different. A Jinchuriki recognized another Jinchuriki's presence almost immediately, even more so their chakra. He'd already used some of his chakra jumping the main gate in here. She should have felt some of that. By now she should have been suspicious of him. Using any more chakra may have caused her to move, or even worse, come looking for him. No henge for him then. So he flipped his hood up. The black cloak obscured his black and orange attire. This wasn't his normal jumpsuit. No, he ditched jumpsuits a long time ago. Jiraiya had sort of gotten him into wearing professional attire. Strapped to his body was a tightly fitted, black and orange Anbu vest, resting atop black pants. Draping over that was a black robe-like jacket that hung loosely down to his waist. All of this was covered up by his cloak. But of course his cloak made him look even more conspicuous. Slipping out his scroll again, he panned down toward the bottom of the linger. Hidden intel from a reliable informant within Kumo said that Yugito always stayed in her room during this festival, and her complex was, he grimaced, in the exact same district that the Raikage and Killer Bee lived. Just great. Naruto deadpanned. The alley was wet, strewn with puddles of brown water and, he'd rather not think of it, but trails of urine. But the streets were much more tolerable. Actually, compared to the alley he'd just stepped out of, the streets were about as clean as a bar of soap. He looked left, then right. The lights were almost blinding. The streets were busy, bursting forth with the sound of prepubescent children running after one another. He smiled. The memories came flooding back again. The festivals back in Konoha were exactly like this one. Happy, well lit. Good times, but such a bad village it was. Of course he never went out during Konoha's festivals, he wasn't allowed, but it was still fun to watch from his window. His reverie left him standing in the middle of a river of people walking to and fro about the festival grounds. He, being the only person not moving, stuck out like a sore thumb. Oi, you. Naruto blinked twice at the happy grin a stand owner aimed his way. The man was waving frantically, indicating that he should come over. Naruto went with it, making his way through the river of men, women, and children. Hey, You look like you're from out of town. Underneath the mask of impassiveness and slight confusion, Naruto grimaced. This might have been harder than he thought. The people here were far more observant than he first perceived them to be. Hesitantly he answered back, "Why yes. I am. Come to visit a friend?" Naruto took his chance. He needed to find some more info on his target, like where exactly in the Raikage's district could he find her. "Hey, actually, I'm visiting a family member, actually, my cousin, you may know her." Lies, lies, all lies. The middle-aged, bald, game stand owner raised one scruffy gray eyebrow. "Oh, do I? Her name's Ni Yugito. She's got blonde hair." He put his hood down, revealing his own golden locks, sort of like me. He could sense the man's spike in fear, the way his eyes bulged almost involuntarily from their sockets at the mere mention of the Two Tails name. He knew of her, hell yeah he did. But just to confirm, "So do you know her?" "I haven't seen her since we were little, but she's written to me. She told me that a lot of people know her, so I figured I'd just ask around." That was one thing about himself that Naruto simply loved. His innocent act. He just didn't look suspicious at all. His baby face just wouldn't allow it. And in the ninja world, being able to put up a plausible facade was one of the deadliest weapons one could have in their arsenal. Deception was a very manipulative tool after all, so manipulative that it was downright criminal. But then the man did something that he did not expect. He smiled. It was suspicious, not in the least bit disarming. "I might know her, but I just can't seem to remember," he said dryly as he rubbed his fingers together. "How's about you give me something to jog my memory, huh?" Naruto frowned. Correction, when he said that the people in Kumo were observant, he was wrong. This man wasn't observant, he was simply looking out for himself. How foolish of him to mistake greed for keen perception. "But I don't really have anything," he responded. "Oh well," the man said, shrugging, "then I guess that I won't be able to remember anything." His gaze leaned off to the side, detached due to a lack of interest in Naruto. Wait, hold on, I might have something." "Ah, that's what I like to hear," the man said jovially. He reached for a mug of what looked like beer and brought it to his maw, quaffing the entire thing in one go. He belched, disgustingly. "So, what do you got for Lil Olmi?" "Here," Naruto said, pulling out a tangled, unruly mass of yen bills. 2,000 yen, it's all I've got." Unceremoniously, and with even so much as a thank you, the man swiped the money from Naruto's hand. Naruto said nothing, he just kept his innocent boy act up. Of course, it wasn't his money, no way. This was some money he'd gotten from pickpocketing someone's wallet while he was making his way over to the stand. What better place to steal money than in a crowd? The stand owner looked at him seriously for a few seconds, as if trying to recall something. He then snapped, "Yes. I remember, Ni Yugito. Ah yes, that girl. Quite the famous one." His hand swayed to Naruto's right and he pointed at a large tower, over by the Raikage's tower. "She's there. Your cousin's an odd one, you know. There is something that just scares me about her." Naruto simply bowed. "Arigato, hey, I've been getting that a lot. Ever since I got here, everyone I've asked has said something similar to that. Why?" The man didn't answer back, now seeming somewhat apprehensive. "And never mind, I'll be on my way now," Naruto said as he walked to his next destination, Ni Yugito. The smelly old stand owner was telling the truth. Yugito was in this direction. He could feel it. With every step a certain feeling that arose in his stomach got stronger, pulling tighter. The feeling he got whenever around another of his kind. The same feeling he felt when he saw Gaara for the first time. That overwhelming, undeniably wonderful feeling of being connected to another in the most arcane and misunderstood way ever. Only his kind got that feeling. Because it definitely went past kinship. No, it was more like resonance. A smile crept along Naruto's face. There was no denying it, he was getting closer. As he watched Naruto flip his hood back on, the man narrowed his eyes. What a strange kid. Okay, now she knew that something was amiss. Was Killer Bee back in the village or something? He had to have been, because this sensation she was feeling, it was just too powerful. When Killer Bee was around, it made her feel happy. But this new sensation wasn't anything like what she was used to feeling. She felt hot, which was why she was on the ground, breathing harshly, clawing at the floor with desperation that only a horny girl could give off. What the fuck? Why? Who was he, and why did his very aura seem so seductive? Why did this new presence make her want to touch herself? He was closer now, she could sense it. Closer than he'd ever been before, possibly right outside her door. At least she thought. Who the hell are you? She spoke quietly, but just loud enough to be heard outside. Excuse me, Ni-sama. Did you say something? Yasuke's voice said from behind her door. Okay, good, you, whatever his name was, hadn't moved. Whoever this person was, he wasn't here yet. And no, she responded shakily, pressing her face even harder against the hardwood floor. It didn't take much, but this bastard had her lusting on the ground, looking as if she were in heat. I'm afraid I can't let you pass. She heard Yusuke say suddenly. Ni-sama, there's someone at the door here for you. He says he's a family member of yours. Yugito's eyes popped open, her lower lip hanging limply to the side. She kept her back facing away from the door. Yusuke poked his head through frame. Oh. Gomen. Sorry to interrupt. Your, private time. He used one hand to shield his eyes from the sight of Yugito laying on the floor. But, I've got someone here who says he knows you. Yugito sat upright. Did he just grunt? She turned, gasping almost immediately. Her hand moved on its own to cover her mouth. No scream came though, she wasn't like that, but it was a shocker to see the sanguine, glistening tip of a blade protruding from her guard's forehead and partially through his palm. Someone killed him. What? No. What was going on? This couldn't have been another assassination attempt. If it were, she wouldn't be so afraid. She actually wanted to scream, needed to scream, but didn't. It took all of her willpower not to. Slowly, the blade removed itself from her guard's skull. The sound of grinding skull and flesh was sickening, revolting even. Scraping, with the sound of sand against metal. Yusuke hit the ground with a deep thud, his eyes wide open, in between them the moist red, diamond-shaped hole where the blade had pierced him. That's when the door opened. Shit, stay away. The door swung open slowly, revealing the form of a boy, leaning on the doorframe. He was wearing a tattered and ever so slightly bloody black cloak. Yugito was on her feet in less than a second, standing defensively, her eyes flashed an intense blue and her pupils elongated into slits. Hey, Two Tails, Naruto said. Who the fuck are you? She snarled as her canines sharpened by themselves, becoming like hard glints of steel. Naruto laughed, shaking his head. He pulled down his hood and stared into her eyes fearlessly. Wa. Yugito squeaked before falling to her knees. She was right. There was something else like her in here. His eyes, they were crimson. You. She brought up one shaky finger. You're like you? Naruto said from behind her. Before she could turn around, he wrapped his arms around her. So nice of you to notice. She fell limp simply under the sound of his voice. Just what was going on? That feeling was stronger than ever. It was so primal. It was the most basic form of attraction that she'd ever felt. He, whoever he was, possibly wanted to kill her, but she couldn't have been more turned on. His breath sparked a wildfire of sensation through her body when he spoke. Just his voice alone was enough to bring her to her knees. She was like some pining animal in heat, willing and ready to screw anything that neared her. What do you want? She said in a voice that was barely a whisper. You. She closed one eye, squeaking like a mouse. That was it, she was the mouse, he was the cat. She was prey. Kami, she was getting hotter by the second. Listen, my name is Uzumaki Naruto. I am the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi no Kitsune, the Nine Tails. I am in need of your assistance. He opened his maw, his canines sharpening on their own, and without another word he brought his full bite down onto Yugito's neck. Tsunade held the saucer of sake loosely, squeezing it in between her thumb and forefinger. She could smell the sweet alcohol wafting its scent into her nose, arousing her desire. She couldn't deny the desire, so she took a sip, a gulp. With a hearty sigh she set the dish down onto the desk and stared into the gray eyes of the previous leader of the village. He sure did look like a wise one. She could tell simply by the way his eyes seemed to gaze right through her. For once this man's eyes weren't glued to her chest. He had to have been wise. He had enough willpower to not look at her enormous moneymakers. Surprising. But he was old, so maybe he wasn't interested in things like that anymore. Pushing her more curious thoughts away, Tsunade returned to the more pertinent matters at hand. Yeah, 3 years ago she'd taken this job on. Jiraiya and Sarutobi, the previous Hokage, had come to pay her a visit personally. It was a little bit too much pressure at first, but she was malleable and she adapted almost instantaneously. By instantaneously, she meant the instant she had gotten a hidden sake compartment installed into her new desk. But anyway, problems were always simple, if not slightly more complicated. The problems and commotions presented to her were never too much for her to handle. Until today, Shizune stood at the far left corner of the office, clinging onto her pet pig like a mother would its child. The look on her face painted a fairly accurate picture of what she was feeling: fear, devastation, dread maybe. She pinched the bridge of her nose and asked Sarutobi Hiruzen, the new head of the village council, to repeat what he said. Sighing, the man looked down and repeated. Yes, she'd heard correctly, her ears weren't betraying her. Let me get this straight, Kumogakure is missing a Jinchuriki? Yes, the previous Hokage responded. He cleared his throat, turned and stared at Shizune for a minute. Whatever I hear, she hears, Tsunade said. Sarutobi nodded, accepting the Hokage's rule. I'm sure that I know the reason as to why their Jinchuriki has gone missing, he said. Through the open window, a chilled breeze blew past her, sending a shiver down her spine. Why? Tsunade asked, her chest squished voluptuously against the oak of her desk as she literally leaned over, coming face to face with Sarutobi. His gaze did not waver, his eyes didn't even blink, stolid. Sarutobi actually did not answer, but he did move. Swiftly he reached into his robe, pulling out a white square of paper. Tsunade narrowed her eyes at the object. After a moment they widened. It was a picture. Most likely the same reason he went missing. No words after that were spoken. Sarutobi simply flicked the picture into her hands, stood and walked away, leaving Tsunade to stare quietly at the picture in his hands. Over Tonton's squeals, she could hear faintly Shizune's voice. What is it, Tsunade-sama? A photo. The Hokage, really, had no clue. Maybe this was a clue. In the picture Sarutobi was standing, dressed and elegantly wrapped in his now her Hokage robes. He seemed happy, a smile wide on his face, and directly in front of him was a boy. He looked happy as well. No, happy wasn't the word. This blonde kid looked enthusiastic, with a smile stretching ear to ear. He threw up 2 fingers in a victory sign and confusingly, yet clearly his mouth seemed to be forming words. What words? Tsunade squinted. No use. She couldn't read still lips. Hey, Tsunade-sama, what's that on the back of the photo? Shizune asked, pointing to the back of the square-shaped memorabilia. She wasted no time flipping it over, reading the words. It said one thing. Believe it? Looking back to the picture side of the photograph, she looked at the boy's lips. The words seemed to fit. It now looked as if he were screaming, believe it. 1,001 questions, all of them popped up at the same time. One was the most important. Shizune was the one to say it out loud. Who the hell is the blonde kid? Tsunade sighed, grabbing hold of her delectable sake once more. My thoughts exactly, Shizune. Naruto stood on the porch. The orange sun rested gently on the horizon. Below and surrounding, there was a village. A peaceful one at that. His village, his home. It had been his home for the past 3 years, at least it was supposed to be. He hadn't been here all that long. Jiraiya had snagged him away and took him on some journey to train. His sensei's words were, when you get back, you will live here. So he was actually quite new here. And Naruto had no problem with that. This place was pretty secure. It had an actual happy village vibe, unlike the misleadingly cheerful Konoha. The best part was, nobody knew who he was. Yet, he took in a deep breath. His house was fairly large, already pre-decorated with decor and fancy smancy furniture that was honestly a bit too gaudy for Naruto's taste. He was a simple person. He was the type of guy to carry every possession he owned on his back. But things were different. He didn't just live in his own world now, and if he ever wanted to take what was in this world, then he'd need the extra room. In personality he was easy to figure out, but in mind Naruto was as intricate as a 2,000-piece puzzle. He'd grown smarter, at least he thought, not that much smarter, just smart enough to get by. The village he resided in, Gunraku, a small trade village in between the direct trade paths of Konoha and Kumo, was perfect. Perfect for observation, perfect for hiding, just perfect. Naruto was just about to lean over the rail just when he heard a loud thump behind him. Following that was the frayed sound of a person's broken breathing. Tired? he asked just as he turned around to see an exhausted and dirty Yugito on the floor. She clawed the ground, leaving marks with her feline nails. Hey, don't scratch the wood, it's mahogany, Naruto exclaimed. Yugito didn't stop clawing, at least not at the floor. She simply moved her hands up to Naruto's foot and began clawing at the soles of his sandals. I guess that's better, he said, somewhat satisfied. I'm here, she said between breaths. Naruto crouched, patting her on the head, rubbing semi-affectionately. She purred like a cat. Good, you came. Of course I did. I hated that village. What you told me back in Kumo, can you do it really? Can you give us Jinchuriki a chance at being in control? That's what I hope to do, he said. As he stopped petting her, she clung to his arm. Don't stop, he continued to pet, only a little freaked out. Last week, when you killed my bodyguard, you asked me to follow you. Why? Yes, a week ago, Yugito had been his target, but who said that he wanted to kill her? No, Naruto was no assassin, although he could be one. He was instead a recruiter. He extended his hand to her, and she took it, wobbly standing to her feet. Her knees buckled uncontrollably. Because I need your help, because you're exactly like me, because we both want to have some power in the foul world we live in. And where do I come in? What's my role? Simply existing as you are. Yugito raised an eyebrow. What? Naruto smiled. You'll know soon enough. But anyway, how did you get here? I ran. All the way from Kumo. Wow. Quote, well, it's your fault. She rubbed the two sore diamond-shaped marks on the back of her neck, wincing from the spike of pain. By the way, what did you do to my neck? Silly, I bit you, can't you tell? She jabbed his arm. No, I mean, what did your bite do to me? It's a seal, my sensei helped me with it, I simply reconstructed it so that I could apply it by biting someone. Yugito frowned, her frizzled strands of blonde hair falling over her face. So you bit me? And now I feel weird when I use the Nibi's chakra. Naruto grabbed her hand, bringing it close to his face. He inspected closely, not at all distracted by the huge blush on Yugito's face. What was he doing? She thought that she was weird, but he was just eccentric. Maybe Jinchuriki got weirder with the more tails they had. Look at Killer Bee, he had 8 tails, and that guy was an alien. She swore it. But she liked Bee nevertheless. And strangely, even if she couldn't understand it, she was beginning to like this boy, the 9 tails. Maybe it was because he had the most tails, but to her, size did matter, and 9 was the highest number a Jinchuriki could hit. What are you? Not correct, you actually have been using the Nibi, only minutely. It's fighting my seal. Yugito cleared her throat. She's fighting your seal. My bad, she's fighting the seal. I can tell, your nails have grown out, which shouldn't have happened. You must have been really out of chakra. Yugito nodded. Hey, how come I don't see any seals on you? Naruto chuckled and lifted up his shirt. Yugito's eyes widened. Kami, he's hot. They were exotic, the seals, arcane in every way to her. She recognized at the least one of the mysteriously ornate runes engraved onto Naruto's skin. Actually, burned was a better word. The seals on his stomach, they looked as if they had been branded into his skin, slowly. Abruptly she shook her head. Wow. That's a lot of seals. She said as Naruto put his shirt back down. 8 to be exact, all of them applied by my sensei, and someone who I don't know. But listen. You smell, come, I'll show you to the bathroom, you dirty girl. Yugito said nothing, fighting off her blush as she followed Naruto inside. Yugito was walking down the stairs, wrapped in 2 towels when she spotted the 9 tails in his kitchen reading a letter. His eyes were serious, glued to the text. She narrowed her eyes, tiptoeing down the rest of the stairs. His ears flicked as he noticed the groan the stair gave at her last step. Oh, you're done. And as much as I would like to spend time ogling you, you should put some clothes on. He didn't say anything after that. He simply pointed in the direction of a separate hall running to the left of the kitchen. She allowed herself to follow the direction of his finger, until she reached another room. Spacious it was, that looked somewhat like a traditional Japanese living room with a modern flair. On the turnaround couch, there were her clothes, washed and pressed. Wow, that sure was polite of him. She wasted no time slipping out of her towel, dry, and slipping into her normal attire. Normally she'd have kept her long hair in a ponytail like she always did, but the 9-tailed Jinchuriki in the other room had her feeling wild. She let her damp locks flow past her shoulders. I see you've dressed up, Naruto said 5 feet behind her. She suppressed her jump, fighting down the high-pitched rush of air trying to surface as a squeak. She simply nodded. Man, that guy was sneaky. She only hoped that he wasn't watching her change the entire time. Listen, I've got good news and bad news. Which would you like to hear first? Naruto said, still glancing down at the letter in front of him. Give me the good news. Well, the good news is that you're gonna get to see your old pal Killer Bee again. Word is that he's back in Kumo and is looking for you. Now for the bad news, I've got a friend. His name's Sabaku no Gaara. He's the case cage. So I've decided to pay him a little visit. I'm heading to Suna. I'll be gone for a while. Why's that bad for me? She asked, fiddling with a wet strand of hair. Because you'll miss me, and plus you're going to have to try to convince Killer Bee to come back here and join us without me. Since I'm gone, that means you're on your own. Naruto said, scanning the page up and down. Geez, conceited much? Hell yeah, he was. So what if she was on her own? Even without the Nibi's chakra, she had power of her own. She didn't need him, although it would help to have him around to explain things because... She had no idea what was going on. All she knew was that she was following this nine-tailed boy, simply because her instinct told her to. Why would I do that? Because, he's like us and he's essential. And he'll probably listen to you. You two were close, right? Yugito nodded. Good, I'm leaving for Suna right now, so leave in 2 or 3 days. And try not to get yourself recaptured. That would be embarrassing. Yugito scoffed. Please, that's an insult. I won't get caught. I'm sure you won't. That comment elicited a frown and Yugito centered his gaze onto Naruto. I won't, just saying. Well, don't, Yugito snapped back. I bet that I'll do better than you. Naruto seemed to be deep in thought, as if captured by her last words. With that, Naruto turned around and walked away. He had already packed, so he could leave right away. And that's exactly what he did. Actually, it was more like he dashed out the door. His energy had him bouncing, literally on the balls of his feet as he skipped across a clearing. Yes, he skipped while he ran, he was that excited. But there was also one other thing that Yugito did not know, one thing about Gaara. That he was a Jinchuriki as well. Boy, what a surprise that would be for her. He'd mentioned it when she got back. He could feel his body flicker with chakra with each step that he took. Soon these grassy plains would wither away and turn to sandy wastelands. He'd be in wind country soon. Now there was one more question. Which route to take? He could run to the left, and cut through fire country, but to get to Suna that way he would have to pass almost directly by Konoha. That would be interesting. He might actually run into some nen. Considering that, there were other options. Why, he could simply cut through Auto, Sound, and make a curved line down into wind country. What with Orochimaru out of commission, bless Enma's soul, traveling through Sound wouldn't be as dangerous as it used to be. He smiled. Both paths were dangerous. He'd play it safe though. Sound it was. Naruto ran at a considerable pace, his eyes searing from the irritation of sand in his eyes. Ow, that stuff was murder on the corneas. He shook it off though, his eyes widened when he spotted the large brown mountainside that served as Suna's main gate. The giant slit in the middle of it ran straight down, dark and seemingly infinite. He'd arrived. Now, there was one question he had been asking himself the entire time. How the hell was he supposed to get inside the damn place? Suna was not Kumo, their main gate wasn't so easy to simply jump over. And he was pretty if not absolutely sure that Gaara would have a couple nin on patrol. With each step, his foot sank deeply into the sand, causing muffled, gritty little sparks of sound with each step. How many miles had he run in this sand? He'd lost count after 56. It brought a smile to his face to finally see the rocky gates of the sand village. For a moment, he felt the pleasure of relief. Quickly it was chased away, however. He couldn't relax now. Yes, he'd made it here. But he still needed to gain access here. He could always sneak in, but that was a lot of effort. For one, if he got caught, well, things wouldn't be pretty for him. The thing was, he was labeled as a missing nin. He didn't call himself that, but everyone else seemed to love the name they gave him. How to get in? How to get in? He thought long and hard about it as he ran, his feet moving seemingly on their own. He could always just walk in. Nah, what was he thinking? He was just japing. Simply walk in, as if. Naruto's eyes widened, a definite smirk on his face, forming slowly. His lips curled dangerously into another one of his predatory smiles. A toothy smile that displayed one of his white canines. Yes, he'd just walk in. After all, he was only a noob nin. The two guard nin bowed deeply out of respect. Low Chunin they were. Young older than he but still green behind the ears. His dusty red hair, cold, calculating eyes, flecked with the light of the desert sun. He looked regal, noble even. The gourd on his back, oversized and slightly menacing, tipped over as he walked. He pulled the blue case-cage cap over his eyes, leaving his gourd behind, outside of the gates. He was the case-cage, honored, apparently in the village. But not really. Case-cage Sama, both guards said, keeping their eyes at the ground. It still seemed that Gaara had that intimidation factor that made him appear so ghastly at times. In a low voice, Gaara said, "Stand, you're doing a fine job." The bald guard on the left seemed to twinkle. Really, case-cage Sama, you really think so?" Gaara nodded once, and the man's lips curled into a smile. He stood straight up. "Right," he said in a salute, "we will continue to guard this post efficiently." Gaara nodded one more. "Carry on," he said and walked past, leaving his gourd at the gate post. The two guards bowed unwittingly once more and stood at attention. After he was a couple yards away, the guard on the right looked over to his partner. "Hey, is it me or did the case-cage look shorter than usual?" The left side guard smacked him in the side of the head. "Stupid, he'll hear you. Why do you think he wears that gourd? Not just to carry his sand, it makes him look taller." "But you didn't hear from me, alright?" Gaara smiled. Well, not really. Gaara, through the normal sea-green teal of the case-cage's eyes, a speck of blue flashed vividly for a second. No, this was not the actual case-cage. The flicker of blue in his eyes gave it all away. Gaara continued walking down the road, his case-cage robes fluttering with elegance. Around him, the villagers looked on with awe-filled eyes, veneration, and outright envy. The people of Sand had changed. Gaara was no longer the monster that everyone feared to even look at. Actually, the Hoi Polloi's perspective seemed to take an interesting twist on Gaara. No longer was he the demon, rather he was the protector, the guardian, the case-cage. It made this Gaara, who in reality wasn't Gaara at all, smirk. His old friend had actually taken his words to heart. He'd really made something of himself, but that was too bad. For his plans, he wouldn't need this new Gaara. He would need the old Gaara, the murderous little demon. In the guise of Gaara, Naruto chuckled but quickly stopped. He forgot, Gaara didn't chuckle, last time he checked. He continued walking, pretending that nobody noticed his little slip-up. But apparently he was wrong, for a firm but small hand clamped down on his shoulder. "Gaara!" Temari yelled, turning Naruto around swiftly by the shoulder. "What are you doing here? You've got a meeting that you should have been at 10 minutes ago." Underneath his disguise, Naruto grimaced. Damn, this was probably the worst time for her to show up. He remembered her, Temari, the raffish older sister of Gaara. While he'd never had a chance to connect with her like he had with Gaara, he knew enough about her to tell that she hadn't changed. She was still as pretty as he used to think she was when he was smaller, and she still acted just as overly assertive. But this was different. This was supposed to be Gaara she was talking to. Wasn't she still scared of him? Geez, Gaara, he'd changed way too much. Apparently the new Gaara was a big softie if Temari could speak to him this way now. Still, he was at a loss for words, so he just stared at her. She blinked. "You feeling okay?" she asked, placing her hand on her little brother's face. Naruto tried to back up, but it was too late, she'd already felt it. Her hand jerked back and she gasped. Seconds later her face twisted into a frown. What was that?" she asked, a bit louder than her normal voice. Naruto gritted his teeth, as did his Gaara disguise. Shit, he thought, she felt them. Being a Jinchuriki was cool sometimes, but at other times it was a hindrance, like now when Temari just felt his whisker marks. "Gaara, what was that?" she asked, her eyes widening. Still Naruto didn't answer. Quickly he placed his palm over his left eye, drawing back on the memory of some of Gaara's old memories, and dropped to his knee. "Temari, I'm afraid that I am not feeling well today." His voice was shaky enough to be plausible. Temari quickly rushed to his side, helping him up. The villagers all gasped and murmured, but he paid no attention to them. He simply kept his act up. "Gaara, do you think it's—" She meant Shukaku. Naruto simply played along. "Yes," he muttered in a tempered voice. "Temari, help me get to my office. I need to be alone." Geez, he should have been an actor, because his acting was positively flawless. But apparently flawless acting could not hope to overcome outright inconvenience, because for some reason it seemed to be flooding towards him in an abundance the instant he stepped into Suna. Out of the corner of his eye Naruto caught a glimpse of someone walking towards them with a confused, if not slightly panicked expression laid on his purple-painted face. Naruto grimaced, damn, as if one of Gaara's siblings finding him wasn't bad enough. Now he had to make up something to get the makeup-wearing freak off of his back. What was his name again? Ah yes, Kankuro, Naruto said pointing to what was supposed to be his and Temari's brother. Temari whipped around, wasting no time gesturing for Kankuro to hurry and approach them. Once he was over there, he knelt down, scratching his head through the semi-veil covering his head. Gaara, what the hell? How did he get here? He asked. The confusion was obvious. Temari answered in a panicked voice. I don't know, but he says he isn't feeling well. It could possibly be. She lowered her voice down to a whisper, Shukaku. But after a moment she said something again. That's not Gaara, too short, she whispered. Kankuro's eyes widened, his mouth agape, but then his face shrank into a tight scowl. He apparently did not wish to figure out who the imposter was. He, unlike his sister, chose to expose first and investigate later. But that's impossible, he said. I just saw you. You were walking into the meeting hall. I spoke to you even. And you seemed fine. Both Kankuro and Temari looked at Gaara, then Temari raised her brow. She cupped her chin. Is it me? Or does he look different? She asked, her lips held the features of a smirk. It was obvious to Naruto, they were playing along, at least Temari was. Kankuro nodded in her observation, his purple-lined eyes narrowing themselves. Yeah, he said monotonously, he looks smaller. Naruto cringed yet again on the inside, curse his imperfect knowledge. He hadn't seen Gaara in 3 years, how stupid of him to try and imitate his visage. Of course he would look different. This was the Gaara from 3 years ago, his was smaller, younger, and not the case. Externally, Naruto sighed and as Temari's eyes widened, a smile crept along his face. It appears that they had noticed. He wouldn't have expected anything less from Gaara's brother and sister, except he just didn't think he'd run into them so early. Kankuro, back up. This isn't Gaara, Temari said, gripping her oversized battle fan. It appears that you've noticed. Well, the jig is up, Naruto said in his regular voice. Kankuro gasped, that voice. No way. Yes way. And I'm afraid I can play right now, Naruto said as he twisted, catching Temari in the side with a hard backhand, thrusting her away about 5 meters. His henge dispelled as he rose to both feet, but underneath it his hood was still up so his face was still shrouded in shadow. Small tufts of his blonde hair could be seen, however. It was these tufts of hair that kept Kankuro locked in place. The villagers were catching on now. They began to move away, slowly though, for their curiosity kept them from running. No, they said, you died. You shouldn't be alive? Naruto finished for him, but I am. What did they tell you before that? That I was a criminal, that I had gone nuke? He cocked his head to the side, his eyes still covered by his hood but his lips sucked in together in a childish pout. No, Kankuro said, crouching low, his left hand went behind his back, grabbing hold of 1-3 scrolls on his back. Konoha didn't tell us anything about you, except that you were extremely dangerous and that if we ever saw you, we should. Naruto felt a flicker of chakra behind him, then a burst of it. It was strong, but acute, almost like a blade. Temari's voice screamed behind him, I'm gonna kill you. She gave a heave, swinging her gigantic fan, launching a powerful but very condensed wall of wind at him. His ears could pick up the whistle of gusts mere seconds away. Gracefully, Naruto jumped high into the air, outstretching his hands like a bird would its wings, and leaned back until he was almost upside down. He felt the harsh wind brush past his head as gently as a breeze would have and centered his icy gaze on Temari, who was in the act of swinging her arms overhead for another attack. He took his inverted moment to assess the situation. It didn't look good, 2 on 1. He was sure that he could take each of them out alone. But, at the same time, they would give him some work. But his thoughts were interrupted when the woody sound of something clicking sounded behind him. Kankuro was a puppet master, he'd almost forgotten. Blindly he spiraled his body and struck in the direction of the clicking sound as it got closer. His foot arched outward, and although he didn't expect to, he caught the clicking head of Crow right in the face. His foot stuck like glue, embedding itself into the wood. Crow's 3 eyes swiveled around wildly, before centering on him, and with another click, it opened its mouth and aimed at Naruto's chest. "Shit," Naruto said aloud before using his other foot to stomp Crow's mouth close. He barely caught a glimpse of the dark poison bomb attempting to exit the puppet's mouth before it exploded in a cloud of dark purple gas. Naruto held his breath as he fell through the cloud. The poison stung his eyes, so he closed one of them until he breached the end of the poison cloud and touched fresh air. Frantically he gulped in the refreshing taste of clean oxygen, and the instant he had exited from the cloud, the ground seemed to fast forward itself closer to him. He was plummeting fast. With the imminent ground at his back, Naruto spun back and flipped down, landing on his feet in a low crouch. But it wasn't over, he could still sense them both coming after them. Kankuro, who was in front of him, pulled his arms up for a moment and whipped them down. The blue chakra-enhanced strings undulated like a snake when he did so. And out of the purple cloud, Crow came bursting through violet cloud of poison, his eyes boggling wildly, and out of his mouth a large foot-long blade protruded from his mouth. But the puppet master had more. Kankuro pulled out a second scroll, tossing it high in the air, and in a loud expulsion of smoke a second puppet, a larger, stockier one with reed horns and a wider body and face than Karasu, charged at him. It clicked the same way Crow did. But unlike Karasu, it didn't attack with blades. Instead it opened its arms as if to hug Naruto. Suddenly, underneath its tattered cloak, its stomach opened up to reveal hollow insides. What, was it trying to capture him? Temari finally finished the arch of her wild swing and cried out, "Kamaitachi!" And out of the tip of her fan, she released a torrent of wind, a whirlwind that buzzed with a mass of acute chakra, cutting chakra. Naruto gritted his teeth, his eyes looking all around him for any hope of escape. He remembered that jutsu, Temari's, it was the same one she used to dispatch of Tenten during the Chunin exams. Quickly he pawned a dozen shuriken, and tossed them with expert precision. 6 went up to Crow and 6 went to Kuroari, Kankuro's other puppet. Kankuro laughed, his voice barely audible over the wind rushing behind him. "What the hell, you missed all of them, you've gotten rusty, that much is true." But Kankuro's smile was wiped from his face. Naruto wasn't through. The shuriken had all whizzed past his puppets, or was there more? Supposedly, they had missed their mark, perhaps on purposely. But this didn't matter to Kankuro. Temari's aerial blades would tear him to shreds before he could even think of a plan. It was such a shame to see Naruto go this way. "Hey puppet master, let's switch jobs for today," Naruto said when he pulled both hands back and tugged with his fingers on the dozen strings of wire attached to the shuriken he'd just thrown. They gleamed brightly in the light, guiding the whirling blades backwards and around both of Kankuro's puppets, wrapping them in wire. Naruto pulled down and back, dragging both puppets toward his body. Naruto planned to eliminate the closest one, so without warning and before Kankuro could react, he pulled down on his of the twine and smashed Crow into the ground. The doll's head exploded in a fine mess of wood and metal. Naruto then ran forward, attempting to outrun Temari's wind. He headed straight for Kuroari. Kankuro tugged fiercely in protest, however so did Naruto with his own wire. That left the puppet caught in between both forces and suspended in the air. Quickly before the wind sliced him to bits, Naruto launched himself, diving head first into the still open belly of Kankuro's doll and closed it from the inside. What came next was probably one of the worst rides of his life. Inside the doll, the wind thrashed Naruto back and forth, tossing him around like he was a ball. He could hear the sound of the blades of wind cutting through the doll's wooden interior. It was okay though, he hadn't been harmed. But then the wind picked up speed, shredding the doll's exterior almost completely, revealing him partially. Wood and metal twisted, scratching, churning, and tearing through with nauseating like that, it ended. The whirlwind of air cut itself off just as quickly as it had turned itself on, dropping Naruto encased in his doll aegis to the ground. Kankuro was at a loss for words. He simply stood, mouth agape, as did Temari. The blonde girl waved over at her brother, silently mouthing, "Sorry about your dolls." But that didn't help. Kankuro felt like he wanted to cry, and so he did. My dolls," he said as he dropped to both his knees. "Oh, quit whining." She looked over at the heap of torn wood and metal. Her expression displayed an emotion that could only be described as hurt. "You think we really, killed him?" she asked hesitantly. A weird feeling stirred in her stomach, permeating her mouth with the taste of bile. She never thought that she'd be the one to kill Uzumaki Naruto of all people, especially after the way he took out Gaara. The ground beneath her rumbled, the sand shifted uncontrollably, and before she could move, Naruto erupted out of the sand behind her and grabbed her from behind. He clutched her hand, pulling it behind her back, twisting it painfully. She squeaked from the pain. "Not a chance, now drop the fan," he said, putting his wrist close to her face, and with a grind of metal on metal a retractable blade jutted forth from underneath his sleeve. He moved the gleaming blade close to her neck. "Drop it," he said with venom. She complied quickly, dropping the fan to the sand with a dull thud. Naruto glanced at Kankuro. "And you, puppet boy, no funny business, or your sister dies." "I don't want to do it, but I will if I must." He brought his lips closer to Temari's ear, lowering his voice down to a whisper. "I'm sorry, but I really don't want to kill you. You used to be a comrade. So I'd rather not. I'm simply here to speak with your brother. Will you lead me to him?" Temari breathed deeply. Something about the boy had changed. His voice sparked fire inside of her. It made her legs wobbly. He seemed a lot more persuasive in a way, disarming even. Was he really the same idiot blonde from before? "Why?" she asked. Naruto didn't answer. He simply pressed the blade closer to her neck, drawing blood. The warmth was gone. It left in an instant, and he was back to the cold fighter he was moments ago. "Answer my question," he hissed vehemently. He glanced at Kankuro once, only once, to make sure that he got the message. That he was not to move at all, or else Temari's head would be sliced off in milliseconds flat. The wind blew dusty sand in their eyes, forcing Temari to close her eyes. What could she say? Those blades were dangerous, and pointy, and drawing more blood by the second. She had to give in and agree, but she couldn't do that, not this easily. The blade pressed harder into her neck and she sucked air sharply in between her clenched teeth. Okay, that one hurt, and Naruto didn't look like he wanted to really negotiate or even show a little mercy for that matter. Geez, the evil little bastard. He sure had grown to be a little demon. She opened her mouth to finally agree to submit, but froze when someone cut her off. His voice was all too familiar, raspy, matured, and still carrying that lazy slack tongue. "Kage main no jutsu." Naruto's body stiffened almost instantly and he grunted as if his muscles were in pain. "No, not him, of all people. Why?" she heard Naruto say as he moved the acute blade from her neck. Slowly, against his will, his hand shook violently as he tried to fight the urge to place it back. Fuck, he just had to. I guess I'm caught then. The boy's vice grip softened off her hand until it was no more. The relief flooded her insides. She was free, she could move. Temari turned slowly around to see Naruto raffishly getting down on his knees, and placing his hands behind his back. His expression was fierce. Behind him she followed a long black mass, a shadow that stretched about 10 yards behind until it finally connected to the one responsible for Naruto's surrender. "Fuck you, Shikamaru," Naruto said calmly, addressing the vested, grim-faced, pineapple-headed Jonin kneeling in the same manner that Naruto was. For a moment, Temari simply stared at the boy. Nara Shikamaru, his bored yet troubled expression was truly infectious because she felt herself frowning as well. Why was she even so mad? Because Naruto had so easily disabled her? Because he actually had the balls to pose as Gaara? There were an interminable number of things that could have gotten her so riled up at the moment, all of them created by Naruto. One of them created by Shikamaru. He'd taken Naruto down without the boy even noticing. She failed to do so. Stupid Shikamaru, always making dramatic entrances. Then Naruto spoke out. "Hey Temari. I see you've grown," he said jovially. "Nice tits." Temari gasped, her hands moving automatically to her chest to keep his unwanted eyes from ogling her. Her blush was fiery. Apparently Naruto hadn't changed everything about him, he still spoke his mind. "Why you perv," she screamed, and as if by response, Naruto's eyes were instantly diverted to looking at the ground, his neck snapping down. She glanced up to see Shikamaru with his nose pointed to the ground as well. "Well, hurry up and tie him up. I can't hold this up forever, geez." "Women, tell me about it," Naruto muttered. "Shut up, both Shikamaru and Temari said in unison. Naruto smiled as he was thrown into the hard stone wall of his prison cell. He grunted out a chuckle and his hood flipped back down, revealing his face. Showing off his grin, his vulpine smile, that he'd been so infamous for back in Konoha. But back then it was so innocent, so pure and unwitting. Now Naruto's grin just seemed predatory. What had happened to him? He'd changed, extremely. Naruto let out another chuckle as he was grabbed by his collar, his head flying limply back as his body thrust forth and Shikamaru cracked another punch into the rigid bone of his cheek. The skin had turned purple, swollen and fervid from the newest of Shikamaru's punches to the face. But he was smiling, and it was beginning to piss the genius off. Naruto, stop fucking around. Tell me why you're here. Naruto smiled once more, a filed canine gleaming in the musty light of the dank cell. He blew his breath out. Where's Gaara? Shikamaru narrowed his eyes, waiting for a moment until he finally gave in and closed them, slumping his head down in defeat. Naruto's smile loosened into a wider one when he felt Shikamaru's hand just leave his collar and drop to his side. After a moment he opened his eyes, staring seriously into Naruto's sky-blue orbs. Orbs that held within them an enigmatic emotion that not even Shikamaru could decipher. If you won't tell me why you're here, at least talk to me. Naruto leaned his head to the side, his face lighting up with false cheer. Oh, really? But why would want to speak with a noob nin like me? Naruto asked, and his answer came quickly, in the form of a hand, Shikamaru's hand, that gripped his shoulder sternly. It was stern yet somehow soft, as if he were actually trying to convey genuine concern. Because you're my friend. Shikamaru wavered for a moment, quickly glancing down to his hand on the blonde's shoulder before awkwardly removing it. At least, you used to be. Naruto scoffed, touching Shikamaru, especially coming from you, one of the nin from our generation. The sarcasm was obvious with his tone. There was a pause where they both said nothing, they simply stared at each other. Each second lit the Nara's insides on fire. Naruto's smug visage, his frisky smile, he acted like he was in control of the situation. As if, look at him, he was pathetic. Hands tied up behind his back, face beaten to a purple swell. His eye was even swelling shut. What could he possibly be smiling at? The fact that he was simply cracking a grin was enough to get Shikamaru mad, but what was even more irritating was that he didn't know why Naruto was smiling. Naruto's voice interrupted his thoughts harshly. So, what did you need to talk about, old pal? Naruto said with more sarcasm. Shikamaru didn't respond, swallowing his large lump of pride and continued on to ask his question. Based on how you answer this question, I might not tell Konoha of this when I return. Naruto raised his brow in interest. Ask away. Shikamaru searched for the words, I don't even know where to start. He said, humoring his erstwhile comrade with a dry chuckle, but there was no smile on his face. Just that cast iron glare of his. The truth was right here in front of him, yet the small voice in the back of his head kept clinging to the spurious reality of Naruto's non-existence. He shouldn't have been here, he shouldn't have been alive, at least the Hokage told him so. But then again, he was only a Jonin, his ears may not have been that important. Perhaps the Hokage felt the same way and opted to hide the shameful truth from those like him. What? Shikamaru paused, made you leave the village? Naruto didn't say anything at first, instead his eyes closed themselves and he inhaled sharply. His back arched when the frisson came. That Shikamaru is something you should ask the Hokage and Hai. The grating of metal against solid concrete cut Naruto off and he turned to look at the person in the doorway. The Jinchuriki's eyes widened with glee. Gaara, he chimed loudly. The sandy red-haired boy didn't move from the metal from the doorway. The light filtering from the window in the hallways outside was intensely bright so Naruto couldn't quite see the boy's face, just his silhouette. But he could tell that Gaara's eyes were wider than sake saucers now. The words left the Cage's lips shakily, "You Uzumaki." Naruto. Naruto smirked, the one and only. Shikamaru stood, turning his back to Naruto and bowed to Gaara. Gaara, please if you could. Give me a few more minutes with Naruto allo. Gaara wasn't interested in that. He didn't turn his head to look at Shikamaru and although he couldn't quite see the Cage's eyes, Naruto was sure that they were glaring at Shikamaru. The thought brought a smile to Naruto's face. Leave us, Gaara commanded calmly. He heard the loud exasperation of Air Shikamaru released and registered it as an incredulous gasp. But, Gaara, leave, now. The boy's tone had turned icy now, he was serious. Naruto simply grinned when Shikamaru simple grunted and gave Gaara another bow. Before walking out of the door frame, he made a left down the hall. After a few moments his steps couldn't be heard anymore, he was gone. Naruto then turned his full attention to Gaara. He'd gotten taller, his shoulders no longer slumped like that used to. When Gaara stepped in the shade of the cell room and closed the door, Naruto took in the masculinity that had chiseled Gaara's features with observant eyes. His jawline had become more refined, his eyes wiser. His face looked the same except it had grown longer with his aging. A fine specimen, and a fine addition to his force. Gaara's clothing was different now as well. As dark once-armed vest, over top the burgundy jacket that draped to the floor, the material diverging in the front where his waist was in order to create an elegant slit. Naruto couldn't help but smile at how regal Gaara looked at the moment. He would have clapped but his hands were still bidden together. Temari informed me that you'd broken through the gates of the village. You posed as me? Yes. Gaara's eyes narrowed as he stared at Naruto. The boy who had changed him had changed himself as well, he could tell just by the way he stared at him. With the eyes of a killer, an inexperienced one, but a killer nonetheless. Just like his eyes looked like before. Entering covertly, that doesn't seem to be your style, Naruto. If I remember, you were more of a show-off. I guess that explains the wind damage in Umain district. Naruto responded. There was a pause, where they didn't say anything, oddly reminiscent of his time in here with Shikamaru, but that all stopped when Gaara opened his mouth and said, Konoha has informed me of your status as a nuke nin. Naruto did not respond. The silence then became unnerving. Naruto, what did you do? Konoha wanted me to keep this completely esoteric, but I guess the truth has been exposed. I guess it has, Naruto finally said. Then tell me this sole truth. Why did you go nuke? Gaara's voice was raspy, far from wavering, but it held within it a certain taint of pity. Pity that Naruto did not need. Naruto simply scoffed. Nuke? No, I'm not a missing nin, I'm a fugitive. Gaara's eyebrow pulled up, but that's not important. What is important is the reason as to why I'm here. You see, me and you. We're the same, that's old new. Gaara's eyes widened for a bit, but settled down an instant later. It appeared that he understood the implied. Go on, he muttered, now interested, although his stoic tone did not indicate his alacrity. Sabaku no Gaara, I've got a proposition for you. Naruto smiled, showing one of his canines which lengthened in response to his flickering chakra. It's sort of a message. Gaara then inhaled sharply, feeling something pull at his gut. It was a sharp, primal pull, no pain, no fear, just instinct in its purest form that told him that he wanted to stay and listen to Uzumaki Naruto. Gaara hadn't noticed until now, but Naruto's physical appearance had altered itself. His whiskers had deepened, becoming bolder, his canines had sharpened, his hair stood on end like a wild animal's, and he smiled wildly, staring at Gaara with blood-red eyes. Naruto, you, Konoha, tried take everything from me, forced me to abandon my old life. They treated me like crap and like a weapon, just like this village treated you like one. But it appears that things have changed. Would you like to change things even more? Naruto asked, sliding his back up the wall in order to stand himself up. His wrist wriggled behind his back and with a slight grunt he snapped the ropes binding him like he would have a twig. Gaara was silent for a long while, the dusty air and minuscule light shined partially on his face. He contemplated it, only briefly. What does changing things even more imply? He asked apprehensively. He wanted to believe that Naruto, the Naruto whom he'd previously admired, had good intention, but the vibe that he was picking up said exactly the opposite. He couldn't help but pick up the feelings of ill will radiating from the boy. Our revenge, Naruto said calmly before adding, and our compromise with the world, all of us demons, together. Once again, Gaara understood the implied. If that is the case, I am afraid that I will have to say, no. If what you are proposing goes along the lines of what I suspect, then I'm sure our revenge will bring us no form of justice. Naruto's eyes narrowed as he looked off to the side. That's a shame, are you sure? It took Gaara a few seconds to respond, but he finally said, yes, I am. I am, the case cage now, Naruto, I protect the village. I cannot allow myself to do anything that will hurt my village's ties with its strongest ally. I am simply not that type of person anymore. I have loved ones to protect now. And I know that you would understand something about that. Gaara said. Naruto looked disheartened. Yes. I would. I only wish I'd never taught you what it meant to have precious people close to you because, right now, who you used to be is the Gaara that I need. Gaara didn't say anything. He'd already came to the conclusion on Naruto's intent. It was definitely dangerous. Any plan that involved his former self had to have been. Gaara turned around to walk through the doorway, entering the brightly lit hallway once more, and again Naruto could only see his silhouette. Without turning around he said, "If that is the Gaara that you need, then I'm sorry. I cannot help, that Gaara doesn't exist anymore. I've grown up. I see that you have as well." Naruto simply chuckled. He'd simply grown up differently, that was all. "Aren't you going to keep me prisoner? Or report me to Konoha? I am a noob nin, or am I dead? Plus I did try to get you to join me." Gaara simply turned right, heading down the hall in the direction Shikamaru had gone previously. Naruto stepped out of the cell, watching his friend's back grow smaller as he walked farther down the hallway and turned away, walking the opposite way. He'd take that as a no. When Shikamaru came back, he'd be surprised to see an empty cell. Yugito sighed. Here it goes again. She'd have to suffer through another one of Killer Bee's conversations, if they could even be called that. Getting past his horrible rhymes and disharmonious voice was a chore in and of itself, but actually understanding what the guy was talking about was next to impossible. There were probably two people who could fully understand Bee's rhythmic speech mannerisms, Yugito herself and Bee's brother, the Raikage. Yugi-chan. "Oh no, I can't go with you, I ride solo." Killer Bee shouted out at the top of his lungs. "Yeah, I'm me, the one and only Lone Ranger, Killer Bee." Yugito grabbed his ear, pulling him down to her height. He tipped over on one foot, chanting, "Ow, ow, ow." But she quickly shushed him. Sometimes it seemed like she was the adult. He seemed to settle down into a less raffish demeanor after a few more moments of ear-tugging. "Shush, shut up," she whispered through her teeth. "No one in Kumo knows that I'm even here, and I'm not about to let you expose me. And stop it with the rhyming." Bee nodded, sitting down on the wooden stool he'd placed down for himself. After a moment he said, "Explain to me, Yugi-chan, who's this Uzumaki guy?" Bee had finally stopped rhyming. He was serious now, at least she thought as much. "And what's so special about him, besides him being one of us? Actually, he'd better not be one lesser than you. How many tails does he have?" Bee's brow rose above the rim of his shades as he leaned in. 9. "Yeah," she said flatly, "and he's seriously got something planned. For us Jinchuriki, exclusively. I met him during that stupid festival. He killed my guard." Bee leaned back, his lips parted, laughing heartily. "I expected you to do that. I was trying not to. But that's not important. What's important is that you follow me to where he is." Bee scoffed. "No, I don't want to meet him. Yeah, he can plan whatever it is. But I'm happy like this." "Oh come on, Bee. Just meet him, once, for me." Yugito placed her palms together above her head. "Please. He wants to bring us Jinchuriki together, for the first time." "Doesn't that sound interesting?" she pleaded. "Not really, Yugi-chan. Actually what it sounds like is that you've got the hots for him." Yugito gasped, her face glowing hot red. I'm just interested in his plan." Bee inched closer to her, poking her in the side with his elbow. "Sure you are." Yugito frowned, her eyes heated with anger. She'd prove it. She grabbed the nape of her shirt and pulled it away and turned around to fully reveal her neck. "Look at this seal." Bee's finger jutted forth and in seconds he was pointing at it. "Whoa, where you get that?" he asked, his voice now filled with zeal. "He gave it to me. He said that I'd need to learn how to stop using Nibi." Bee gripped his chin, deep in thought. Perhaps this Naruto person was actually worth the visit. Going so far as to personally visit Yugito and mark her with a seal. He must have had something big planned, or at least something with a worthwhile result. It was tempting, going to meet the 9 tails, but was it worth it? "Oh." Yugito smiled, and he said that he wanted to fight you. Just to see how you guys measured up against each other. The steam practically bellowed out of Killer Bee's nose when he shot up like a rocket. "Oh, ha ha ha. Why didn't you say so? This guy sounds pretty interesting." Yugito smiled once again, chuckling nervously. Be could so gullible at times. She then wondered how Naruto would take this when he got back. Well, he couldn't complain. She'd done what he'd asked of her, just in a different way. It didn't take too long for a change to occur within the young Jinchuriki's mind. After his encounter with Gaara, he'd been taxed with trying to sneak back out of the village, because with his earlier commotion, he could not leave underneath the guise of the case cage like he had done coming in. In truth, it had been harder trying to sneak out than it had been trying to sneak in. Ironic, huh? He didn't appreciate the irony though. The sand whipped his face, again, his back was turned, facing the split mountainside that was Suna's gate. Inside his pockets he balled his fists tightly, the skin turning almost snow-white. Damn it, I'd been so sure about it. And he had, really, but now that he looked back in retrospect, he'd been rather naive. He should have known. Gaara was his friend, but unlike Yugito, he was not so impressionable. It was stupid of him to even think that Gaara would dare raise his hand against his most trusted ally. Yes, so stupid of him. His hood covered his eyes, hiding his furrowed eyebrows that indicated his anger. He slipped his hands from his pockets. It would be a long journey back, and he really did not have the time to walk the entire thing. So, heading in one general direction, northeast, Naruto broke out into a brisk jog. The routine movement helped calm his nerves. The shakiness of his hands and legs began to dissipate after a few minutes of solid jogging, which then slipped into running. The sun was aimed high in the air, baking his back. It was tolerable, he thought, better his back than his face, but he wouldn't be surprised if he came back with a tan after this. That was unlikely. Subdued by the thoughts of his failure at recruiting Gaara, Naruto turned his mind to a question that he'd been dying to ask himself for some time now. What did I do wrong? He said, in between the steady breaths of his run. Was I really that stupid? It was a thought, and maybe, just maybe it was a veritable one. Maybe Naruto was really that stupid. Previously, he had not thought as much, but now that he had his hood flipped over his eyes in shame, the illusion that he'd been trying to avoid may have actually been reality. The wind was picking up. He could tell by the way his body reacted to hearing its howl. Naruto grimaced. Wind meant motion, and in a desert, motion equated with a sandstorm. Fuck, I need to pick up the pace, he thought to himself. Another thought occurred as well. Exactly how long had he been running for? This heat was unbearable. On the way here, there had been quite a large and unusually rare cloud hovering overhead. It was weird, but the shade was appreciated back then. He simply thanked Kami and went along his way. He dug his foot into the ground, picking up the pace. The gritty sand collapsed and dispersed beneath his footsteps, pulling him further. One foot switched places with the other in a quicker motion, for the desert seemed to be howling even louder around him. The sand seemed to be alive, lifting itself from the ground, swirling with ferocity. But as quickly as he'd taken his steps, he'd set them to an abrupt stop. The sand was swirling, around him. His eyes glanced around frantically, maybe a little nervously. What the hell was up with the wind today? Rather than the wind, it seemed that only the sand was moving about in its serpentine fashion, like it was alive. Gaara. Could it have been? Was it really him? A slight curl developed on the side of Naruto's lips, a fanged smile. Why? Did Gaara change his mind? He would have his answer soon enough. The sand wrapped itself into a spin 5 feet away from him, a funnel of tan and gravel that howled like a mass of wolves. It kicked up in velocity, forcing Naruto's hand to move up to protect his face. At one point it became so fierce, the howl so orotund, that Naruto was forced to open his mouth, letting the sand in and yell out. The word, Gaara, tore through his vocal cords, and as if the sand really could hear him, it ceased. Just like that, leaving tiny pieces of sandy minutia to skydive to the ground. Now Naruto was really smiling, for the sand had brought with it its partner. Gaara stood in front of Naruto, clad in the attire he wore previously. The teal of his eyes were as hard as stone. For a long gravid moment, the two Jinchuriki said nothing, opting to stare into the color of each other's eyes. Naruto wanted to speak, he was twitching even, yet as subtle as a silent kunai. Something struck him, telling him to keep his mouth shut. He listened obediently. Gaara stuck his hand out, his head was turned to the side. Reluctance perhaps? He did not want to look his way? Naruto didn't spend any more time wondering about it. Gaara's hand was still hanging tightly in the air. Then his hand moved, slowly. It grasped Gaara's firmly. Then they stood there, pausing until Naruto said, "Well, will you be joining with me or not?" His voice was laced with hope. Gaara's response came immediately after Naruto spoke, as if he'd been dying to release a held breath. "No," he gasped. Naruto's mouth opened for a moment, then closed, then hung open once more. His eyebrows were arched like a bridge. "Then why come here?" "Because," he paused, the memory of his motives rushing back. Shikamaru placed a hand on Gaara's shaking shoulder and he turned to meet the boy's sour expression. The orange light from his office window reflected off of Shikamaru's dull irises. "I let him go," Gaara said. "I let him get away because he was like me." Shikamaru grimaced but did not criticize. It seemed that Shikamaru could empathize. "Then this certainly makes it harder to catch him now that we know he's alive," the Nara mumbled. Gaara's hand tightened around Naruto's and he turned his head to face him for the first time in minutes. The sand began to swirl around the blonde boy's feet. Gaara had chosen to complete his previous sentence because. Naruto. As Shikamaru turned to walk out of the room, Gaara suddenly sprang to life, grabbing hold of his arm. He held his face low to the wood of his desk. A tear dripped slowly onto it. "Wait, I'll capture him. He's still in the desert now. I can feel it. I'll bring him back." Shikamaru shook his head. You know, Gaara almost sounded like Naruto when he said that. Well, the old Naruto anyway. "No, don't bring him back. The council doesn't want him back. Kill him instead. Unless it's too much for." Gaara inhaled sharply. "No. I'll do it. It's better that it be me. I'll kill Naruto." The sand began swirling around the unwitting blonde's feet with an even fiercer spin than before. The howl of the sand had returned, except it was lower, just barely audible. Naruto seemed to understand Gaara's intentions because his eyes were closed now. "I'm sorry." The sand began to creep up Naruto's legs. The grainy sound of it traveling up his clothing sounded a bit like rain pattering against cement. In seconds Naruto's waist was colored tan. In a minute Gaara's reluctance caused his sand to move even more slowly. It was up to the blonde's neck, covering everything but the arm still latched onto Gaara's hand. "Sand. Cough." Gaara began to pronounce. But before the sand's terrible embrace could spring to life and crush him, Naruto's ruby-red eyes snapped open. His smile was sadistic. The filed canines in his upper jaw gleamed menacingly with the sun's light. Gaara actually almost took a step back. This wasn't Naruto he was looking at anymore. This person was the demon. Gaara could tell by the way he smiled so lucidly in the face of his own death dealer. The old Naruto would have never had this much fun in a situation like this. Or maybe. Gaara's eyes narrowed onto Naruto's still smiling face. Maybe he wasn't having fun. Maybe he was hysterical. Now Naruto gripped Gaara's hand. His newly razor claws tore precious skin. "Do it, Gaara. Kill me. I know you can. You're twice as strong as I. You can end it all. End me. With one final syllable." Naruto turned his head to the side, like the Cheshire Cat would have, and said, "Or maybe, you don't want to kill me. Because deep down, somewhere in your subconscious, you want to help me?" Gaara gripped tightly as well, fighting back the torrent of feeling flowing through him. The wind howled so that his voice was only a few decibels from being muted. "No. I won't help you. Naruto. You have to stop this, or else you'll die right here, right now. You're right, I want to help, because you are in a way, my brother, but I can't." Then it came unexpectedly, the fierce burning in his palm. The scorch of branding chakra that flowed from Naruto's hand and burned its way into Gaara's palm. The blue haze that developed between their handshake was accompanied by a small fizz of sizzling flesh. Gaara yelled out in pain, falling to his knees in an instant. Naruto still stood upright though, and he never let go of Gaara's hand. His smile was infernal like the burning between their palms. Through the desert howl and his own fleshy sizzling, Gaara heard Naruto utter two words. "Too late." And like that Naruto let go, letting Gaara's hand drop to the soft bed of hot sand, which in comparison to the burning in his palms felt like a bed of ice. Naruto slipped his hand back into his pockets and waited as the ululation of wind and sand died down. Gaara's own breathing was coarse and strained. His head pounded from sledgehammers of nausea. He could feel his chakra like he could feel the air, minutely, and he only aware of its presence because he knew it existed. "Ooh," Gaara moaned. When the sand was gone and the landscape silent, Naruto gave Gaara one more look. A certain look that made Gaara want to read Naruto's mind, an enigmatic look. "I'll be seeing you, Cage, Jinchuriki, my brother," Naruto said before turning around and heading northeast. When Naruto's back had faded away and Gaara's head reoriented itself, the Cage did nothing but slump further to the ground. His other hand, which hadn't touched Naruto, he used to move a bed of sand beneath him in order to carry himself back to the village. It burned so much. Gaara glanced at his hand, grimacing when he saw the kanji for the number 1 branded into his skin. Naruto was right, it was too late, he was now officially a part of this. Tsunade was sitting in her room, lips sipping away at a small saucer of her wonderful sake when Shikamaru came marching in. He literally kicked the door open before slapping his hands down onto her desk. She looked at him with a questioning eye as he fought to catch his breath. The questioning look soon got serious. He was interrupting her sake time. This had to be important. Shikamaru took a few moments to collect himself. He was sweaty, dirty, tired. Dirty, frantic. Dirty, and actually a little scared of the look Tsunade was giving him. Oh, and not to mention dirty. "What is it, Shikamaru?" she asked sternly. The Cage was attacked, he puffed between breaths. "What?" Tsunade leaned out of her seat. "Do we have any knowledge of the assailant?" Shikamaru nodded once, his eyes swiveling down to the small white square on Tsunade's desk. They had the words, "Believe it," printed on the back. He swiped it up, holding it between his middle and forefinger, turning the image to Tsunade, and pointed at the blonde smiling mop of hair. "An old friend, that we both need to speak to the council about." Yugito woke up to a very unsettling sight, one that sort of freaked her out. It was very weird, yes, but strangely, she liked it. She liked the smile on his face, she liked the way his canines were sharpened in an almost ludic fashion, the way his blue eyes, sparkling blue eyes, watched her. And she knew that even before she'd been awake, he had still been watching her. But it was still very odd that Naruto had been watching her sleep. She was confused. Should she have been flattered? Maybe not, and most likely, it wasn't in the way she thought. "Did you sleep well?" he said, turning his head away to look out the window. His clothes were ragged and dusty. The harsh rupture of a few minuscule tears along the hems of his attire signified that he'd been in a fight. His hair was wild and untamed, and the blondness of it was hinted with the light tan of grainy sand. He looked a mess, but even worse, he smelled like one as well. She wrinkled her nose, pinching her nostrils closed between her thumb and forefinger. "You smell," she said, her voice still had that raspy sleep-worn tone. Naruto shrugged. "Deal with it," he replied, "besides I'm going to take a shower in a little while." "So, how did it go?" he asked, his eyes gliding over to the glass balcony doors, where they settled onto the town lane in the vista. "He's in the room downstairs," Yugito replied, now sitting up in the bed. Naruto seemed to understand what she meant by that. It elicited a tiny smile at the corner of his lips. "Excellent. You." Naruto actually froze for a moment, the smile quickly fading. After a moment he said, "You could say that I got him." "And by that you mean?" Naruto interrupted, "I mean, he's on our side, but not on our side." "So you failed?" Naruto actually humored her accusation, chuckling a bit. Standing up, he walked over to the door. "Partially," he muttered. He leaned on the frame for a moment, seeming to immerse himself inside of his own thought, and for a long while it looked as though he wouldn't say anything. But then, his hand moved up and he indicated, with two curls of his index finger, that he wanted her to come over to him. She listened. No resistance at all, which was far more than strange for her. She was always the rebellious type, reluctant to a fine point, but strangely, when around this certain Jinchuriki, she wanted to listen and that she wanted to obey. Because he seemed to have orders worth following. His acknowledgement gave her a very warped sense of pleasure. Why? She had no clue. Well, she supposed it was because she wanted him to like her. Not in that way, but in a way that put her on good terms with him. He was a friend, a powerful one at that. He had benefits, and she wanted those benefits. So she would obey willingly. One could say that by being of use to him, he could have been some use to her. It was weird like that. Yugito moved swiftly from the bed over to Naruto's floor, holding her hands folded in front of her, like a kitten waiting for her master to toss her the yarn. Naruto gave her a size up. His stare stirred up a bit of a tingle in her stomach, but she didn't let it show. He was supposed to like her, and she him, but nothing further. His brow rose to an arch. "You're wearing my clothes." He pointed at the blue pajamas she was wearing. I didn't have anything to sleep in." A light hue of red appeared above the ridge of her nose and her cheeks turned rosy pink. "Fine," Naruto said, dropping the matter. His hand shot past her face and clamped onto the back of her neck. She blushed deeply and the urge to yelp almost won. Naruto gazed at her for a moment. She just wondered what the hell he was doing. What are yo?" The answer came with a sharp jolt of something she'd placed between pain and pleasure. Naruto's fingers rested lightly above the 2 points of her bite mark. "All done," he said. "What did you do?" she asked, cocking her head to the side. "Maintenance," he answered. "For what?" "For the seal I gave you. I had to check how strong it is on you every now and then." "Oh, alright, is that all you need?" When Naruto nodded, she said, "So I can go back to sleep, right?" Naruto nodded again, and in almost less than 2 seconds, the sheets were wrapping themselves around Yugito's body. Her pillow seemed to curve tightly around the shape of her head. Before Naruto turned to leave, he had one more question that he wanted to ask though. "Just curious," he began. "Exactly how did you get Killer Bee to come here?" Yugito's eyes snapped open. Good thing her back was to Naruto or he would have seen her expression, which went from worried to mischievous in seconds. An infernal smile warped her lips. "You'll find out in the morning when he wakes up," she responded. Naruto had a bad feeling about those words but shrugged off the anxiety as he turned and walked out. Naruto's eye twitched dangerously, his teeth clenched together tightly. Through his nostrils he blew out a plume of exasperation. It was very much obvious that he was starting to get annoyed. "Yo bro, what's the dealio?" "Shut up," he responded. "Yeah, of course, but your words bite me and hurt. I won't stop talking until y'all fight me, squirt." Naruto was sitting on his couch with a bowl of ramen in his hand that leaned dangerously off the side of his palm. For once in his lifetime, Uzumaki Naruto wasn't paying attention to his food. Why? Because of the tall, dark, and bizarre freak who would not stop bugging him about a fight. Just as Naruto was about to take another slurp of soup, Killer Bee's voice erupted in his ear yet again. "Faito, biatch," he bellowed. Off to the side, Yugito looked on with mischievously curious eyes. She sat curled in a little ball across from him, hugging a pillow and her knees to her chest. Her grin answered all of Naruto's questions. It was her. She was the one who was making this all happen. Killer Bee wanted to fight, because Yugito promised him one. Naruto placed the bowl of ramen on the dark wood coffee table and covered both sides of his ears. "Make him stop," he groaned, clenching his eyes shut. "How can you even take this guy's prattling?" Yugito's neck fell limp as it cocked to the side innocently. "Whatever do you mean, Naruto-kun?" She didn't mean to, but she let the honorific slip out. The oddest feeling told her that Naruto's seal was doing something to her. "Naruto-kun?" B repeated, his voice rising in pitch accented by his confused tone. At that moment, his rhyming ceased. "You like this kid that much to refer to him as Naruto-kun, you of all people?" B glanced over at Naruto, who simply shrugged. "I was clueless about this until now." Yugito's hands flew up, waving frantically. "And no, it's not like that. It's just that, you know." She blushed down to her toes. Since when was she so friendly? More or less a person who she only knew for a couple of days. It was that aura of his, rubbing off on her like a skunk's stench, almost impossible to get off once it got on. It was hard getting Naruto off her mind. All she thought of was him and his plan. Mostly the plan though. "That's it, come on kid, I was promised to fight." B's hand shot out grabbing Naruto by the nape of his collar, peeling him off the couch with relative ease. "Where can we fight?" "If we must," Naruto grumbled, his feet hovered above the ground, "then I'll fight you." "Yes." Gaara sat in his office, his forehead gleamed with sweat. He leaned over his desk, his nose hovering just a few inches over the burnished wood. His breath was volatile, his eyes were wide and bloodshot. A blast from the past insanity of his younger days seemed to be upon him. Was that it? Was he going insane? Was he imagining all of this? Did he not feel another presence? Was this mark on his hand ever going to stop burning? No, he wasn't. This was all real, not a fabrication of insanity. Naruto had really done that to him, marked him with a common rune. The seal said 9, but what could he draw from that? Nothing, that's what. His hand could have exploded for all he knew and he wouldn't have been able to do a single thing about it. Well, there was one thing that he could draw from the seal, but he supposed that was what he deserved for trying to kill Naruto. Maybe Naruto knew beforehand and this was some sort of countermeasure to protect himself. After all, Naruto couldn't have killed him, he was a cage. And yet his hand still burned feverishly. Since when had Naruto become so adept at making a person feel utterly helpless? That was supposed to be his thing. Gaara grumbled as he looked at the potted sand lily on his desk. The flower's petals were dusty brown and streaked with white. It only reminded him of the squirming pain in his palm. It bothered him so much that his breath was forced to filter out through his teeth, that he was forced to pound an indentation into his desk every 30 seconds. Slowly he rose to his feet, clumsily knocking down his chair in the process. He made his way to the clear glass doors leading out to his balcony. He needed a breath of fresh air that would surely soothe or at least draw his mind away from the burning in his palms. He pushed open the doors, deeply inhaling the nighttime air through his nostrils. Infiltration complete, he heard someone say. Gaara's eyes snapped open to see a smallish blond man with hair draping over one eye kneeling down on his balcony. His eyes were a dull color, looking bluish-gray in the glow of the moonlight. Above him he noticed a rather large white avian circling overhead like a vulture. He'd seen it before, but the pain in his hand was distracting as it was, so he simply overlooked it. What the man wore on his body soon became an apparent problem that Gaara had grimaced to after realizing what it was. Black robe with red clouds. Akatsuki. Why now? The man smiled. Gaara's hand still seethed with pain, and yet in this most unlucky of times he could not afford to show any weakness, not even the slightest trace of it. Even fear the size of a grain of sand would be his undoing. And against an opponent like this, he could not afford to be seen as weak. That would only serve to make this kneeling man grow bold. Boldness in the face of a cage? How foolish. Gaara stood up straight, clenching his fist tightly. The man simply grinned again, his eyes growing wilder as his lips parted to reveal his teeth. Gaara simply grumbled, what a show of gusto indeed. It was not often that someone was actually excited about fighting him. The audaciousness of his needed to be fixed instantaneously. Gaara wasted no time. The dark brown sand was already leaking from his gourd, spilling over like liquid. The Akatsuki member seemed to notice, for his eyes were already scanning the shifting tides of brown swirling around his feet. He was observant. Without any movement, the sand rose violently, surrounding the blonde. There was no time to strangle, he simply intended to crush his opponent. But before that could happen, the man had already launched himself into the air. His bizarre avian cosset was there to catch him. He mentally cursed, shifting his hand upward and sending a snake-like tendril of sand after the man and his bird. His granular weapon actually seemed to hiss or at least drone as it twisted and turned with a life of its own. The man's bird made those exact twists and turns. It dodged and evaded and ducked, slipping through every aerial assault Gaara bombarded him with. The guy was adept at evasive maneuvers. The speed of his odd creature alerted Gaara to the fact. Suddenly his sand was forced to descend. The Akatsuki member made a sharp dive down toward the streets of the village. Gaara's brow became moist with apprehension. Was it a possible attempt to make him strike his own villagers? Most likely. Just as the bird's beak was about to collide with the ground, its body curved into a tight 90-degree pull upward that put its belly on level with the ground. It now soared swiftly above the street, mere inches separated it from the ground. Still Gaara's sand persisted, curving just as sharply as the bird did, and pursued it vigorously. Of course, now that his sand was closer to the ground, he was forced to slow down, which was not a problem. He had other ways of catching his prey. The man's bird flapped its mighty wings, stopping when two other tendrils of sand erupted from the ground in front of it to intercept. It screeched and darted left into an alleyway before curving back up into the air. Gaara's hissing sand tendrils followed. He gained altitude, going higher. So Gaara did the same. The cage launched himself in the air using a thin cloud of sand to catch himself and stay afloat. Underneath the turbid sky, Gaara had now become parallel to his combatant in the air. They locked eyes for a long drawn-out second. In that moment, Gaara gave his opponent a quick look up and down. He forced his brow, or lack thereof, down. The man looked rather young and effeminate, Judging by the way his Akatsuki robes fluttered loosely around his body, it was safe to assume that he did not possess a lot of muscle mass. Much like Gaara himself, which was one of the things that gave him off as a long-range fighter. That was when the Akatsuki member opened his lips to speak. "How did you find me so quickly?" Gaara pointed at the man's awkward bird. "Birds like that don't exist in this desert." The blonde man simply laughed. "I guess my stealthy tactics failed. But that's good." He moved his finger to his left eye, revealing a horrid contraption with a lens fixed in the middle right where his eye would be. He tapped it and it clicked as if it were a camera. "Now I don't have to waste time searching for you." Gaara had heard enough. The pain in his arm was beginning to get to him. He'd end this quickly. The Akatsuki member's eyes widened as he glanced down, and to his surprise, dozens of sand globules came floating up from the ground much like the goo in a lava lamp and clumped together in one large dusty mass behind Gaara. The sand's form was free and volatile. It shifted as if it were alive. With a toss of his hand, the sand attacked, rushing at the man in a rush of brown. Immediately he was brought back on the defensive, swerving, diving and dodging. And after a few moments of evasive maneuvering, the blonde turned back to see that he was being pursued by a claw composed of sand that looked disturbingly similar to flesh. Gaara suddenly screamed out in pain, gripping his hand. I haven't even done anything yet," the man mumbled quietly to himself. There seemed to be something burned into that fleshy hand of sand. Perhaps that was the reason for the Jinchuriki's pain? Glowing and branded into the lumpy claw of sand's palm was a giant red kanji. It said, 1. The man arched his brow. The toothy slits on his palm had stopped chewing, indicating that his ammunition had been prepared. The man smiled, turning his head to look past the rushing arm of sand directly into Gaara's eyes. The boy's look was feral. His pupils were now tan and shaped oddly like a 4-point star. Shukaku had finally decided to show himself. However, it was a surprise. The one-tailed Jinchuriki was said to have had control over his beast. At least that was what the intel said, but of course intel was always limited in one way or another. With a speed unseen before, Gaara sent the giant claw of sand rushing at the blonde man. Naruto landed in a somewhat crouched position. The strain was tight on his knees. He looked up just in time to catch a dagger-like blade. He gripped its body firmly by the hilt. The tip of the weapon was dangerously close to piercing his nose. A numbing pain surged through his body and Naruto immediately dropped the weapon. Electric blades? Come on, give me a break. Naruto stopped his complaining long enough to notice B, who was already on him. This guy was flipping and swerving all over the place. He looked more like a flying ball of needles than a highly skilled Jinchuriki. But truth be told, he was. B came with ferocious velocity, sliding in and out of attacks before he even had time to devise a way of countering. He had an extremely volatile style of fighting that, because of its unpredictability, gave it some stability. He would give everything he owned to borrow Kakashi's eye right about now. Stated concisely, he was outmatched. It was B's insane 8 blades against his 2 hidden blades, and B's blades conducted electricity. How many times had B stabbed him? He was beginning to lose count. Had it not been for his healing factor, his skin would have been as porous as a sponge. He might as well have been a sponge. B was moping the floor with him, pun intended. A flurry of quick blades had him extending his wrist blades instinctively. The metal of his blades clanged loudly against the metal of B's. Yugito sat quietly, cross-legged, on a rock, watching, her eyes darting swiftly in order to follow the pace of the battle. The grassy pasture they were sparring on had been reduced to barren land. The only thing that remained untouched was the creek flowing undisturbed beside them. That is until Naruto went sailing into the water. He regained his footing on top of the water. "How's your match going, Naruto Dono?" Yugito called out to him. He glanced at her. She was smiling. He was frowning. "Just fine, Yugito-san. Now would you please shut?" Naruto froze his tongue and looked down. B's hand had latched onto his ankle, slowly dragging him down. B then tugged, violently dragging Naruto down underneath the water. For a moment, bubbles popped along the water's surface. Yugito raised her brow. "Wonder what's gonna happen," she said. Her answer came when the surface of the creek exploded upward in a spray of mist, and flying out of the mist was Naruto's limp body bending across Killer B's arm. Yugito placed straightened fingers over her forehead. "Home run," she muttered, watching Naruto and B sail through the air. Lariat biatch! B screamed, using the same arm to fling Naruto down onto the creek edge. Half of his body in and the other out of the creek, Naruto groaned painfully. "Oh, what a surprise," Yugito said, almost sounding bored. "You lost." Naruto coughed up both water and blood. "Shut up," he sputtered before his body went loose, his head lolling to the side. B landed a few feet from Naruto. He then walked over to his prone body. "What, that was hardly a fight. Get up and battle me with all your might." Naruto did not respond. "Fato, shut up," Naruto yelled, opening his eyes. "Can't a guy pass out in peace? Not unless you're ready to do more battling. Come on, let me fight y'all, I'll have y'all, rattlin' kid." "Stop," he coughed, rhyming. "I'll fight again later." B looked at him for a second, his full expression hidden behind the partial obscurity of his shades. "Fine then, kid." B extended his arm out, putting his fist out. Naruto looked at the fist for a moment. Yugito mentioned something like this to him right before they started sparring. He knew what to do. Ignoring the taut pain in his arm, he gently bumped his fist against B's before letting his entire arm drop like a weight. "So you'll help me out then?" Naruto asked. "Hell nah," B exclaimed. Naruto attempted sitting up but went back down due to the pain in his chest and ribs. What, why not?" "I gave you your fight," he asked in a raspy tone. B then let out a hearty laugh, slapping his gut. "Sorry kid, I came here only to throw down. Since we're done, I'm heading out of this town." Naruto hit his head against the ground. "Fuck," he said. "I forgot to mention," Yugito said. "B never stays in one place for long." She gave him a slight giggle. "Sorry, I never made any promises that B would join us." B laughed once more. "Then B," Naruto said, completely serious now, "can you promise me that you won't tell anyone where I am?" There was a brief pause filled with silence before Killer gave Naruto a nod. He shook his head. "No, not good enough B. I need you to swear on your blood that you won't tell a soul about my little hiding spot." B could see the gravity in his eyes. His deep blue irises did not waver, he was not blinking. He puffed out his chest and tapped his hand against it twice. "I swear," B began, "on my blood as a Jinchuriki that I won't attempt to tell anybody." B waited with his fist to his chest for Naruto's response. "Good, thanks a lot." B put up 2 fingers, the sign for victory and peace. After Yugito helped Naruto, slowly, back to his home, they had both taken to sitting in the living room. Naruto, sprawled out on his couch, snored lightly, his hand dangled over the edge, brushing against the circular carpet. Parallel to him, Yugito sat on the couch, cross-legged, hugging the same pillow she'd been hugging before B and Naruto had their match. Her eyes were fixed on him, she stared seriously. She couldn't help but wonder what she was even doing here sitting on another boy's couch in a house in which he owned. It was all for the plan, the devious plot, devised in order to get back at the world, right? Designed by and for the average Jinchuriki, so it seemed. But was that the only reason why she was here? She felt the back of her neck. Come to think of it, she still hadn't even seen it, her seal that is. Yugito's mind instantly went to work conjuring up dozens of exotic runes and patterns and applying them to the back of her neck. Now she actually felt the need to go and look at it. Quietly getting up, she tiptoed past the couch and made a silent dash down the hall and up the stairs. She burst into the bathroom doors and pulled her hair up. She tried twisting her neck in multiple directions, straining her eyes to the very corners of her sockets, attempting to take a glance at her seal. Every time she tried and failed, she would let out an uncomfortable groan of defeat. Yugito then went digging into the mirror cabinet in hopes of finding another small mirror to assist her. When she found one with a plastic orange rim, she turned her back toward the cabinet mirror, and yelped. The smaller mirror dropped from her hands, but Naruto caught it before it smashed to sharp pieces on the floor. "Careful," he warned, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. "Curious about the seal?" A little," Yugito responded sheepishly. She hadn't even heard him come in. Naruto held the mirror in front of her, and for a moment Yugito struggled to see the reflection of her neck. But when she did, her eyes widened. It was far from what she expected, nothing exotic, nothing amazing, rather her seal looked to be more of a seal of ownership. "T2?" she said confused. "2? What the fuck? 2? You bit the kanji for 2 into me? What are you trying to do, copyright me?" Yugito clenched her teeth. Naruto could see them begin to lengthen. As the saying went, hell hath no fury like a Jinchuriki woman scorned. She grabbed a fistful of his worn-out sparring clothes, the cloth ripping from the pointed tips of her claws. Whoa, now wait, I know this looks kinda bad but… But what? Yugito snarled. I do not want to be walking around with a label on my neck. It's demoralizing. Naruto turned his head to the side. She obviously had some feminist issues. I know, I'm sorry. The number has nothing to do with your biju other than its tail count, okay? The number 2 was just my personal flair. Yugito shook his head roughly a couple of times. Then change how it looks. I can't. Why not? Because a seal is a seal once it's made a seal. Can't be changed. Can't be altered. It can only be layered with others or removed. And I'm not removing it. Yugito was silent for a moment. It seemed that she was taking a moment to swallow down multiple her lumps of pride. He wouldn't remove it and she definitely wasn't letting him layer her neck with another seal. You don't own me, she said. I know, but I would like to. She kneed Naruto in the nuts, hard, causing him to release a deep grunt from his throat. She let go of him and watched him slowly fall to floor. Naruto curled into the fetal position. Oh Kami, he wheezed. You deserved it, she said. You're right, but I'll get you back. How? She asked, curious. Curiosity always killed the cat. Naruto laughed, although it sounded painful to do so. That seal. I designed it specifically for you and it responds especially well to me. It increases libido whenever you activate your two-tailed chakra, and I've already seen how horny you can get without your chakra. Yugito then took a step back. What, that's it. So if I tried to use Nibi's chakra, I get horny? That's lame. Naruto smiled, reached his hand out and dragged his fingertips along Yugito's exposed leg. His touch burned with pleasure, almost as if he'd just dragged fingertips of fire across her skin. Yugito shuddered and took a quick inhale of breath. She quickly moved her tingling leg back. Whoa, what the hell? Is it really that lame, Yugito-san? She didn't respond, her face was fervid and red. Help me up please, he asked. Yugito narrowed her eyes, he was toying with her. She would not help him up, he was tinkering with her body. How could she, why would she? But in her current state, if she touched Naruto again, it would feel good, that caress of warmth that her body responded so eagerly to. She was just a bit curious as to what just happened. One more touch wouldn't hurt, right? Her arms moved on their own, her knees automatically bended down to she help him up. She hadn't even given her limbs the command, that was their idea, they just moved. She wanted for nothing more than to walk out and leave him on the floor, but her body was driving her. She shouldn't have been helping him. She needed to stop and walk away right there, but that tingle in her leg. When she took his hand and pulled Naruto up from the floor, the fire came back through her palm and again her body acted on her own. She not only pulled him up, but she pulled him closer to her chest. As ashamed as she was about it, she knew that she'd try to get Naruto to touch her again. Purely for the physical pleasure, of course, nothing more. But still, he was treating her like an animal in heat, and she was acting like one. So, do you like my gift? Naruto asked, although Yugito could barely hear him. With frayed breaths through her wide-open maw she exhaled out, I hate you, in one continuous stream of sound. From one Jinchuriki to another, Yugito was already oddly attracted to him, this just made it worse. Naruto ran his hand through her hair, she closed her eyes and breathed in gently. And as soon as it had come, the fire was gone. Naruto had removed his hand and limped out of the bathroom. He threw up the V for victory sign with his fingers before leaving, much like B had done after their spar. Property of the Nine Tails, he said before fully disappearing down the hall in search of a nice, cool ice pack. Yugito simply rested herself on the toilet, her nails retracting, her teeth becoming blunter. She looked down, and saw that she was wet. Tsunade and Shikamaru both stood as a centerpiece right now. It was like they were two tacky ornaments for the eyes of the ninja council to leer at in disgust, with the exception of one, of course. Tsunade, state your reason for calling this meeting. Koharu Utaden's voice certainly did hold a tinge of high-handedness whenever she spoke with Tsunade, and even more so her smug expression did nothing to belie her true disposition. There was no walking around it, simply put, the old lady, richly dressed in brown and cream robes, hair tied in a bun, was just as sour as ever. I assume that it is something important, said Homura Mitakado, Kaharu's former comrade and additional member of the council. He leaned forward, adjusting his glasses impatiently, a gesture for her to proceed. Tsunade did not respond to either of them, rather she aimed her plea toward the newest member of the ninja council that would not lift his chin to her as she spoke, Sarutobi Hiruzen. His new elegant black robes still brought out his regal qualities, although his previous Hokage attire suited him much better. Sarutobi-sensei, she said, still using the affectionate suffix, I'm sure the news hasn't reached you yet, as I was just told of it myself, but the case cage was attacked. All three sets of eyes widened slightly at the news. And what is the source of this information? Tsunade turned to Shikamaru. His hands were crossed behind his back as he leaned lazily to one side, nervously trying to avoid their stares. It must have been a total drag to be stared at like that. The Nara, Tsunade said. He twitched slightly at her all too unfriendly naming. Why yes, that's right. Shikamaru responded meekly. Kaharu seemed to inhale deeply, as if pondering. She trusted the Nara, she knew of their intelligence, and bore no hostility toward them. Even so, she couldn't help but not know how to question this child. Tsunade began. During his recent journey to the Sand Village he witnessed a certain assailant attempting to stir up some trouble in the village's main district. Apparently he battled the Case Cage's two older siblings and disabled them, forcing Shikamaru here to arrest the assailant himself. I can see how that came about, Sarutobi said. Your family's shadow jutsu sure do come in handy. Thank you. Shikamaru responded flatly, wary to not get too flattered in their presence. Tsunade continued, after the assailant, male, was taken into custody, he apparently escaped, and during that time, attacked the case cage. Homura glanced at Shikamaru. Is that the accurate truth? Shikamaru nodded, his arms still behind his back. Of course he remembered not to tell them that it was Gaara who went after the assailant, on his own. He didn't quite trust two-thirds of this particular council to mention that. Homura looked unimpressed. And what of it? Was the case cage injured? Is he still alive? And since you saw him, who exactly is this assailant? Can you properly identify him? Tsunade cut in. Now that brings us to my true reason for this rushed meeting. Shikamaru, show them what's behind your back. Her gaze became fiery in an instant as Shikamaru pulled out a thick manila folder labeled, classified. Taking the folder from Shikamaru and handing it to Sarutobi, she said, Shikamaru as an eyewitness, claims that it was this boy who attacked Gaara. The former Hokage opened the folder. His lips began to tremble, his eyes widening, his breathing at once hastened to match the sudden rapidity of his chest. He glared at Tsunade over the rim of the folder. Tsunade. You had better not be playing with me, because this is not possible. What is it? Kaharu asked. Let me see the file. Sarutobi listlessly handed her the folder and upon gazing at its contents she scoffed arrogantly. This is impossible, as Sarutobi has said. This boy died 2.5 years ago after going rogue. Homura seemed to sense where this was going. Surely she cannot mean. Tsunade's terrible clamor cut him off. She had stomped her heel into the floor. She pointed directly at Sarutobi. Enough with the lies, sensei. Can you honestly sit by as these two selfishly cover up this boy's existence? This same boy who I know you've cared for. Sensei. I realized that this council has been hiding this from me. Shikamaru's claim only verifies it. Uzumaki Naruto is still alive and well. And after all these years, he has finally decided to show himself. He attacked the case cage for Kami's sake, the same person he defeated during the Chunin exams 3 years ago in order to save this village. I don't know this child at all, as he supposedly went rogue before I became Hokage, but I do know that as Hokage I cannot possibly sit by and ignore a possible threat to our village. He got into the sand without a problem, he may be able to do it here. He certainly has the proper motive. After her long-winded speech Tsunade waited for her sensei's response. He simply gazed at the ground, his eyes and lips shaking, too shocked to say anything. Finally he did. Naruto would never do something like that. The Naruto I knew wouldn't have. But he's not the Naruto you knew anymore, Shikamaru said, drawing in Sarutobi's attention. I've seen it with my own eyes. He's much different. He has changed. He's much more sadistic, and equally skilled. You saw what he did to Uchiha Sasuke 3 years ago when he tried to defect from Konoha, didn't you? That was 3 years ago, and 3 years ago his file was cut off. He snapped his fingers, just like that. Now he has resurfaced. I'm begging you, we should pay attention to this. Silence. Nara Shikamaru, nobody addressed you. You're not within the proper rank to speak out of turn in front of this council. Keep your mouth shut or you will be demoted. Uzumaki Naruto is dead. He has nothing to do with this village anymore. It was his choice to leave and his choice to die. Sarutobi inhaled sharply, turning his newly formed glare to Homura. Tsunade is right, no more of these lies. It was you who tried to turn him into a weapon, you and her. Not me, I won't do this. Naruto left because he wanted to preserve his humanity. He was aware of what becoming your soldier would entail, that is why he left. He did not leave us, we chased him out. Sarutobi stood up from his seat, he glanced at Tsunade, noting her wide smile. Come Tsunade, we have much to speak of, we shall get to the bottom of this at once. Thank you sensei, Tsunade said, bowing to him. Shikamaru mirrored her smile and action as well. Koharu, Homura, my precious teammates, you were once in a position of influence above me, but we now stand on equal grounds. If you respect me, do not stop me. I am already dead set on solving this myself. Once again Koharu scoffed, do what you must you old fool, getting involved with him will get us into huge trouble. But if you so please, pursue him, just don't let your attachment to the boy obscure your judgment if you manage to find him. With that he left the room along with Tsunade and Shikamaru. The tension hanging in the air was only alleviated once they left the council hall. Konoha's bustling streets could always calm a person. However, the tension was brought back to life the instant the trio set foot onto the streets. It came back in the form of a familiar brunette holding a pig. Lady Tsunade! Shizune yelled out, as she sprinted toward them, forcing her way through a uniform cloud of people. Taunton, Tsunade's pet pig, had to have been suffocating in Shizune's killer grip. Her stubby legs wiggled cutely back and forth as she protested for her release, whining, "Poohee poohee." Sorry, Shizune said, placing Taunton on the ground, who immediately began circling Tsunade's legs. Is there a problem, Shizune-san? Sarutobi asked. After a quick breather, Shizune stood up straight. The case cage has been kidnapped, she said firmly. What, the case cage has been kidnapped? Oh yeah, I got word from some sand merchants I did business with yesterday. They seemed so depressed. It must be harsh not having your leader around, especially one as strong as a cage. Naruto cupped his chin thoughtfully and leaned back in his chair. Gaara of all people had been captured, even after he'd placed the seal on him? It didn't add up. That seal should have made him bloodthirsty. He should have been hearing about Gaara's violent rampage through his own village, not his pitiful kidnapping. Yet here he was, listening to this ramen shop owner ramble on about how Gaara valiantly sacrificed himself to protect his village. Yeah, Naruto agreed. Luckily we don't do that over here. All we've got is a feudal lord, and he's miles away. But hey, did that sand merchant tell you anything about the guys who took the case cage? Like what they looked like? There was a steaming hot bowl of ramen in front of him, but he hadn't touched it yet. He was far too engrossed into the conversation. The ramen shop owner, Iori was his name, folded his arms across his chest, looking blankly at the ceiling of his ramen shop. No, not really. The guy the first spoke with had no clue about who actually took the case cage. I see, Naruto responded. Oh wait, yes? He did tell me about some rumors about what happened that night. Apparently the guy the case cage was fighting was wearing a cloak. Naruto stared at him blankly. Quote. He said, hey, I guess that doesn't really help at all, Iori said. Naruto raised his brow, ya think? But that's okay. I don't really need to know about it, it just sounded cool, that's all. Anyways, thanks for the meal Iori-san. The shop owner looked down at the bowl in front of him. But you haven't even touched your food. Naruto was already walking toward the exit. I wasn't hungry anyway. He gave him a smile and a wave. Yugito-san, let's go. Yugito popped out from underneath one of the tables, scaring an old couple, a wide-eyed look on her face. "Nya?" she asked, holding Iori's pet cat close to her bosom. It purred comfortably. "Oh, we're leaving, but I don't want to." Naruto stopped by the exit and gave her a look, a certain flash of the eyes that nobody else but them was aware of. She immediately placed Iori's cat down on the floor, patted its head and hurried quickly to Naruto's side where she gave a quick bow before leaving the restaurant with him. Once outside, Yugito scoffed, "You know, I really don't like this innocent act." They turned onto the main market district that led toward hills. Naruto's home was close by, lying comfortably at a reasonable altitude that overlooked the city. "I know you don't, but we're way too close to my Konoha to have people know that we're ninja. This town isn't supposed to have any ninja, its main purpose is trade." He got an earful of Yugito's grumbling. "Oh, whatever then," she said, "what the hell's next anyway?" Naruto stopped walking, standing still in the flow of people walking by. Yugito mirrored him. "Why'd you? We're going to Suna," he interrupted abruptly. "I think I have a hunch as to who took him," he sighed. "I only wish they hadn't popped up now." Yugito blinked rapidly, arching her brow. "Huh? Who?" Naruto's expression stilled and an uncomfortable breeze blew in from the west. She could barely hear him speak due to the crowd's uniform murmur. "Akatsuki," he said. Kakashi ran at the head of the group. His eyes were stolid with determination while at the same time he regretted every step. He wanted to turn around and head back. He could feel the hairs on the back of his neck already begin to erect themselves. While he ran, he thought deeply about the words Tsunade gave him before he left the village, after everyone had been briefed and left her office. "I know that he was your former student," Tsunade said. He simply nodded at the statement, swatting it away like nothing. He knew what he might be running into when he chose to accept this mission. He'd matured too much as a shinobi, however, to let his emotions get in the way. But he wasn't the problem. The one running behind him was who he was most concerned about. If she had been told what he had been told, she most surely would have declined this mission. If she knew that they were quite possibly running into a reunion, it would have deemed her as emotionally unfit. She would have sat this mission out, leaving him to go on by himself. But this mission was too precious to have just one man, regardless of his legendary fame, go by himself. By why this team, Team 7, the incomplete cell? Why not send in Guy's team first, not his? He was in no rush to meet his old student. Of course they weren't going in response to Gaara's kidnapping, no, they were sent to tend to his older brother, Kankuro. He'd been damaged while battling, poisoned by a toxin that Sand had never seen. "Regardless of what you say, I have deemed you as the best option for the leading team," Tsunade said. Kakashi sighed. That woman thought in bizarre ways. He cast a quick glance back at his teammate. Sakura was deep in thought. Entirely, she was the reason that they had been sent out first, because she was the medic nin, one of the best in fact. It made sense after all to send the apprentice of Tsunade herself. But even so, it wasn't right. Kakashi bit his lip. Couldn't he just tell her? Unexpectedly his lips began to move and he stopped abruptly on a thick tree branch. Behind him Sakura mirrored his action, blinking once, before stopping next to him on that same branch. Kakashi-sensei, why did you?" Kakashi cut her off. "Just be on guard during this mission, alright?" "Oh, okay?" With that they resumed flying through the trees. Kakashi could already begin to see the dense greenery dwindle away. It served as its own indicator. They were getting close to Suna. The air had become moist, saturated actually. It was humid and sticky and Naruto's clothes clung to his skin like tape. He peeled his shirt off his chest slowly just to have it snap back onto this skin in a rubber band-like motion. They had left Gunraku yesterday with one goal in mind, retrieve their kin. Gaara's presence was wispy and linear, almost like a trail of scent leading them to his position. They followed Gaara's trail of presence vigorously, without stopping until they reached their destination. Of course they should have been exhausted, but having an extra set of chakra to call upon when yours didn't cut it was helpful too. Naruto took a few steps out onto the water. Below his feet it was dark and muddy. He couldn't see down toward the bottom. Yugito hunched over on her knees. She was more tired than he was, but of course she used less of her beast's chakra and more of her own to get here. She apparently didn't like the hindrance his seal placed on her whenever she used the Nibi's power. It led Naruto to believe that running through the desert while horny wasn't too pleasant. "Hey," she huffed, "how did you even find this place?" Naruto's face was steeled as he spoke to her, "The same way you found me, your seal." She raised her head. "Wait, so this Gaara guy is a Jinchuriki?" "Yeah, and he's the case cage too?" Naruto nodded. "Cool," Yugito said. She looked up and gazed at the humongous boulder, resting in the mouth of an even bigger cavern. Giant red gates framed the boulder perfectly. It looked more to be like a portal to hell. Yep, this was definitely the Akatsuki's hideout, and even if it wasn't, this was where Gaara was. So, how are we gonna get in? Naruto gave her a quick, "Are you serious?" look, that his words soon matched. "Are you serious?" he said. Naruto threw his hands up in the air. "We're gonna bust in." He pointed at the giant boulder at the mouth of the cave. "See, it's just a big rock, let's just slam through it." Yugito shook her head, she simply couldn't understand it. Why was he smiling? You couldn't just approach the Akatsuki, repeat Akatsuki, like that. How can you be so nonchalant? Are you an idiot? She paused and considered the possibility and said, you shouldn't answer that question. Look, I know what I'm doing. Well, did you realize that there was a seal so obviously placed on that boulder? Naruto squinted like a senior citizen trying to read the world's smallest book and scoffed. Well, of course I did. I'm not an idiot, you know. Sadly, Yugito took that as code for, I'm an idiot, you know. Oh, I see what they're trying to do, Naruto continued. It's obvious that this seal is a distraction. Yugito blinked, and how can you tell? She folded her arms over her bosom, something that Naruto didn't mind eyeing as she did so. You just said it. Look at just how obviously placed it is on that boulder. That seal won't kill us, really fatal seals are masterfully hidden. That one, Naruto pointed, isn't fatal. It's a trigger to what most likely is a diversion tactic. They're trying to buy time for something. Well, Yugito began, her now slitted eyes glazing over to a deep, fiery blue. Let's not give them that time. Her razor-sharp tone, along with the sight of her two blade-like canines, instilled something close to arousal in Naruto. Not the norm though, he, like her, was lusting for a battle. Yugito's erotic scent had him raring to go. He could smell her, them actually. The mix between her two-tailed chakra and her own natural libido, it was intoxicating. No, that wasn't it. Stimulating was a better word. It fit the scenario much better. Naruto's eyes flared red as well, bleeding into a dark crimson. He smiled a toothy smile. Yeah, let's. Naruto replied. So what's the plan? She asked, getting into a low crouch. Naruto did something similar, except he got onto all fours, like an animal. Simple, what any extremely powerful pair of Jinchuriki would do. Smash right through it. Yugito looked at the boulder, then at Naruto. He wore a crazed expression on. She then turned back to the boulder. Good plan, she said. Then the heat hit them both. It was thrown over them like a veil of crazed temperature. Naruto closed his eyes and inhaled deeply, feeling the new, more dangerous chakra begin to flow. With the new flow of chakra, Yugito's knees drew closer to each other, barely exposing the effects that Naruto's seal had on her. Truly she would enjoy whatever was about to happen. The two tattooed on her neck would ensure it. For some reason she felt good. All squirmy inside, fuzzy. Perhaps Naruto's seal wasn't so bad after all. It did give her what she'd always wanted to instill in herself since she began using Nibi's chakra. True pleasure during battle. Ready? Ready, she replied, panting. And just as she was about to lunge, Naruto grabbed her by the wrist. Wait, what? She said, seething through her nose. Let's hide. Sakura, now. Kakashi yelled, throwing himself at the boulder. Sakura charged, releasing a mighty yell, then cocked her fist back, preparing to slam into the boulder with all of her might. Her entire fist glowed blue for a second, saturated with the earth-shattering chakra she diligently cultivated. A second later her fist blew into the body of the boulder, sending a wave of shock throughout. It wobbled a bit before slowly crumbling down into the water, revealing the gaping mouth of the cave. The rocks tumbling into the water had struck up a low roar, almost like a distant waterfall. Hold it, Kakashi commanded, quickly moving to her side. Don't move, he said. Sakura froze immediately. What's wrong? Kakashi turned her head with a point at the entrance of the cave, where two shaded figures stood. They were obscured by the dust that had kicked up from Sakura's punch, but could both be clearly seen as a male and female. Sakura squinted for definition. Were they Akatsuki? They did look a bit smallish, almost as if they were kids themselves. Then one of them, the male, opened his eyes. They glowed a vibrant red that pierced through the pother of smoke. He had a sharp slitted gaze with a lancing effect. This man, or possibly kid's voice was even sharper than his eyes, and if she recalled, oh so familiar. Sakura-chan, long time no see. Sakura froze, her lower lip quivered violently, her mouth agape like a fish's. Oh my, is that? To answer, Naruto walked out of the dust, his eyes shimmering a bright blue as he smiled. You'd better believe it, he said. Sakura almost fell to her knees. How in the hell was this happening? Naruto was here. After almost 3.5 years, after he died, supposedly, he just showed up here out of the blue? There was no possible way this was happening. She looked desperately at Kakashi. His countenance was strained, like he was holding something back. No, it can't be you. You can't be alive. You died. Sakura yelled. Naruto paused then laughed, throwing his head back. Me, I died? Impossible Sakura, I never died, never. I'm very much alive as you can see. You know you shouldn't believe everything that your higher-ups tell you. Then the second shade emerged from the dust, walking out with an erotic sway that caught everyone's attention. Her eyes were a dark onyx, and her face, very petite and fair, was framed by golden locks of hair that were even lighter than Naruto's. She taped Naruto on the shoulder, you know them? Naruto nodded, not the old lady, but the two on the sides used to be my teammate and sensei. One hell of a reunion, she chimed. Sort of, they're missing one. He looked back to Sakura, hey where's Sasuke? Sakura flinched, Naruto caught it. He's gone, she said suddenly. Naruto lifted his brow, as in, dead? As in. Like you, Kakashi corrected. Naruto knew exactly what he meant, but Kakashi couldn't have been more wrong. Everyone thought that he was dead, some claimed that he was rogue, but nobody really knew just exactly what Naruto was. But of course Kakashi's statement meant that Sasuke wasn't in Konoha anymore. Such a sad thing, it seemed that all of his efforts had gone to waste. Sasuke was the catalyst that set the rest of his life in motion. Because of him, Naruto was labeled as dangerous, as a weapon, therefore he was forced to run away. And what was this now that he heard? How ironic that both he and Sasuke ended up in the same melting pot, running for their lives, from their homes. Karma was a consistent bitch, wasn't she? Kakashi continued, Naruto. Even though it's like this, it's good to see you. Naruto didn't answer. Rather he stared down his old sensei, with a bored expression, as if he'd spotted a lie. Something had changed within his gaze, there was no more green innocence behind his ears, so there was no use playing this ruse any longer than he had to. Kakashi's hand crackled to life with electricity. Sakura gasped and looked at him with confusion-filled eyes as he crouched down low, exciting the water with his hands charged. It's nice seeing you, but I have orders as to what I should do if I come into contact with you. With that, Kakashi made a straight dash for Naruto, who oddly enough looked calm through it all. Water and ruble were thrown to the side as Kakashi closed the distance between them. Naruto's face became clearly defined as the light from his attack illuminated his face. Then Naruto did the totally unexpected. He smiled, he seemed to reopen his eyes, reinvigorating them with a violent red light. His smile was fanged, as was the female's he was with. Her eyes had gone a very deep blue now. In a split second, Kakashi had come to realize just who it was standing by Naruto. That was none other than the missing girl herself. Ni Yugito. Kakashi closed in for the kill, a second hand coursing with the dangerous electricity now. He would only impale Naruto, he couldn't afford to kill the Jinchuriki of his village's enemy. Katsu. A large, paper-white centipede erupted from the ground between them. It wriggled madly releasing a bright glow, it then exploded. The shockwave had blown Kakashi back into the water, and no sooner than a nanosecond was Sakura there pulling him up. Naruto and Yugito however had been blown back into the Akatsuki's cavern. It didn't take long for them to recover either, they were on their feet in seconds, and facing something to which they had been ill-prepared to see, but nonetheless it worked in their favor. This had been a rescue mission, but it seemed that there would be no rescuing needed. High above the heads of two red cloud-cloaked figures, one blonde and the other sporting some sort of petrified spiky-haired look, stood a perfect sphere of the dark, chakra-imbued sand. Directly above the sphere was a single large eye that stared directly at Naruto, more like only Naruto. Naruto had seen this before, Gaara's ultimate defense. This time it was much more foreboding. There was a different Gaara in there. Would you look at that? 3 for the price of 1. The blonde Akatsuki member said. He had his hair done in a very, if he remembered, Ino-like fashion. I swear you Jinchuriki are as unpredictable as ever. Here I was thinking that I had taken this guy out. He pointed to Gaara's sphere, when all along he was planning this. It doesn't make that much sense to me though. All he's doing here is waiting for his death, unless. His eyes trailed off. He was waiting for you two to show up. Naruto's palm, exactly where Gaara's seal was, burned ferociously, disorientating him quite a bit, and he had only become vaguely aware that Kakashi, Sakura, and that old lady had entered the cave. I'm sure he knew we would come, Deidara. The man now known as Deidara widened his eyes, at the same time his face constricted tightly. Howdy, he then looked up at Gaara's sphere. You're communicating with him. Naruto didn't answer back. Yugito was surprised. She didn't know anything like that could happen. Exactly how complex was Naruto's seal? Very, Naruto said, bringing up the unclear implication that he could read her mind. It was actually a bit scary. To think that copyright on the back of her neck was much more useful than she'd thought. It wasn't just decorative, it was a linkage. She then brought back the memory of how she found Naruto's house after he'd bitten and left her to find him, how she somehow felt that he was in a certain direction, and because of it, how she knew where to go. Was that what he was doing now? The short, disfigured one with the spiky hair let out a raspy chuckle. How interesting, a linkage between Jinchuriki. His tail flicked up, now attentive, arched over his head, much like a scorpion's. Kakashi tensed. What did he just say? Naruto fell to his hands' knees, as did Yugito, except she turned to face Kakashi's group. The both of them let out a feral growl from the pits of the throats. They seemed more like animals now, hostile, on edge, much more instinct-driven. The hunchback's tail struck out with ferocious speed. And like that, before Kakashi could lift up his headband, both Naruto and Yugito disappeared. The tail, which belonged to Sasori, whom Chiyo had identified, crashed into the spot where Naruto and Yugito had been. It scraped its body along the ground before shooting back up and heading straight for Sakura. Kakashi's now exposed Sharingan spun wildly, clearly discerning Naruto and Yugito's body zipping, more like crawling, all along the walls of the cavern at incredible speeds. It also saw Sasori's tail heading for his student. It wasn't long before Chiyo was in front of her though. The old lady held her arms out wide, as if gesturing for a hug. Swiftly, she spun to her left, a wild pirouette, just barely dodging, and at the same time, kicked Sakura to the side, forcing her to dodge as well. The tail seemed to lose interest in them and turned on Kakashi, rushing him like a serpent. He attempted to roll out of the way, but the tail undulated its body in such a serpentine fashion that it twisted and coiled its thickly armored body around his ankle and flung him across the width of the cave. The good thing about having his Sharingan was that even in situations like this, during his uncontrolled aerial tumble where his vision was disoriented, he was still able to keep track of everyone in the room. The blonde-haired Deidara still hadn't moved yet. More importantly, he could still see Naruto and Yugito running along the cave's innards, switching positions every 2 to 3 milliseconds. Naruto gradually got closer to him, then closer, then faster, until he was so close that he could see the whites of Naruto's claws, making a reach for his face. Naruto literally crashed into his already moving body. As a result, they sort of cancelled each other out, simply stopping abruptly in the air before free-falling to the ground with Naruto landing on top. He used his right hand to pin Kakashi down, his knees to lock the harsh straddle. With a flick of his wrist, the hidden blade in his sleeve jutted out, and he prepared to strike. Directly above them, Sakura was high the air, fist raised, bellowing from her lungs another Amazonian battle cry. It seemed that she had finally found a use for that abrasive voice of hers, but of course that could have always be turned into a weakness. It seemed like the entire world had forgotten about his partner. No, not the Nine Tails, the blonde female. Like an arrow plucking a plump bird from the air, Yugito smashed herself into Sakura, much like Naruto had done to Kakashi. And her claws connected. Naruto wasn't even looking, but he could tell that Sakura was no longer above him. Naruto smiled, his full attention back on his sensei. He sniffed the air twice. You smell that? Smells like Sakura's blood. Kakashi grimaced. Naruto, what's happened to you? Naruto straightened his face, releasing his maniac smile, replacing it with a duller visage. How many times would he ask this? Hopefully not every time he met with someone from Konoha. Nothing, Kakashi. Nothing, I've matured. And at that moment, directly behind Naruto, Kakashi could see Sakura fly in and then out of his view as she crashed to the floor and didn't move. The girl he now knew as Yugito landed beside him. Her eyes were a deep glowing blue. She spared Kakashi a glance before turning to Naruto. "We gotta go." Naruto pondered it for a moment. "I suppose you're right," he said, but stopped short as he noticed the pair of hands grabbing them both by the ankles. "Shit," they both said as their bodies were forced underneath the ground, leaving only their heads exposed. The Kakashi that Naruto had thought he was on simply poofed away in a dispersion of smoke. The real Kakashi then revealed himself, popping out in front of them in a low squat. He pulled his headband down for a moment, and when it came back up, his Sharingan had changed, looking much more elaborate, much more kaleidoscopic. Mangekyo? Naruto muttered before both of their heads fell limp. With that, Kakashi made somewhat of a retracting motion with his head and erected himself. Shio and Sasori seemed to be locked in a staring contest of sorts. She had good reason for it, to see her grandson operating on such a low level. It must have been hard, almost exactly like what he felt when he saw Naruto. But there were no time for such thoughts, only action. Kakashi's hands moved with blazing speed. He ended on Tiger and puffed his chest out. He could feel the fire swelling in his stomach, the fiery chakra coursing from his fingertips to his hands. As he reared his head back to release the flames, the flow of chakra suddenly ended. A wave of malevolent chakra washed over him like seawater on the shore. His neck almost broke as he swung himself around, staring wide-eyed at the ball of sand that protected Gaara. Above it, the once normal eye had changed. Where a normal pupil should have been, there was a black star with 4 dots surrounding it in a square pattern. The cool teal of irises morphed to a dark brown, and the eye could not stop itself from rampantly looking all over the place. As if it was crazy. But even worse, both Naruto and Yugito were standing on top of the dark ball of sand, and their eyes glowed like hot coals. Quickly Kakashi made a double take at the hole that he had thought he buried them both in, as he expected nothing was there. Naruto really had gotten better. In any other situation he would have been proud. Even now he wished, faintly, to give Naruto that same old thumbs up he always had whenever he showed an improvement. Naruto's voice drew him out of his daze. It was cool and controlled. "It's cool beingness, you know, having beasts to pull you from a genjutsu and all. And speaking of beasts," he patted Gaara's sphere while pointing at the eye. "Looks like this one is ready to come out." As if on command, the sphere began to crack. The eye above moved even more rapidly than before. The cracks spread throughout the front of the sphere in a web-like pattern. The eye then stopped moving, and Gaara burst through the cracks in a ghastly form that caused just about everything to stand still. His lower body was fine, but going up further to his weight, his upper body was seemingly engulfed in some brown mass that looked disturbingly similar to flesh. There was purple licks of color along the surface of his new skin. With an elongated tanuki face, Gaara snarled with a maw lined with diamond-hard teeth. The other 2 Jinchuriki had taken positions behind him. Deidara raised his brow, deciding that now was the time to take action. Honestly, what was this? 3 active Jinchuriki, what insane man went up against that? He could tell by the shock on the Sharingan user's face that he was thinking the same. A choice would need to be made. There was absolutely no way that he and Sasori could take those 3 brats on by themselves and defend against the other 3. However, where he and Sasori were at a disadvantage, so were they. Neither side could take on 3 Jinchuriki, and neither side would fight alongside one another. So the only option was. Deidara quickly made a tiger seal. Directly above the Jinchuriki, a rain of white spiders poured down heavily. Katsu. One by one they each exploded in a myriad of flashes, creating a pother of smoke and dust. Deidara exchanged quick glances with Sasori. The memo had already been passed. He jumped, and underneath him, a large unnaturally white owl exploded into existence, and with 3 giant flaps, he was airborne. "Sorry children, perhaps another time." The owl made a quick turn around and was outside of the cave in seconds. Bursting through the cloud like a bullet, Kakashi followed. The blasts did nothing, the Jinchuriki still stood. Naruto had his hand on Gaara's massive shoulder. "Gaara, listen to me, we need to leave," he yelled. Gaara, in his semi-transformed state, showed no signs of ever hearing Naruto. He simply dug his claws into the ground and charged out of the cave as well. Naruto and Yugito had no choice but to follow. When the smoke fully cleared Sasori, the only enemy left, his beady little eyes staring daggers at Chiyo. Sasori. Chiyo. Sakura was just getting up, wiping blood from her lips. That blonde girl had gotten her good. Despite it being a blindside, she still got her. She wasn't really sure what happened to everyone else, but nonetheless her gaze was averted instantly to the stare-down happening between Sasori and Chiyo. She rushed to Chiyo's side, sensing the dangerous sparks flying. "Lady Chiyo, I'm here." "Good," Chiyo replied, "I'll need you." Naruto sat on tree branch, one leg raised up to his chin, his eyes were blue. Yugito sat next to him, fiddling with her hair. The Nibi's residual chakra still had her legs buzzing, so to keep her mind off of it, she swung her feet gently. Every now and then she would cast Naruto a quick glance, and every time she would see that smile of his. His eyes were plastered on Gaara's hulking form, stricken with a fresh touch of awe. It was amazing, the things that he could smile at. Of course she could smile at it too, but that wasn't the point. Gaara was rampaging, sort of. She actually thought it looked more like violent venting, but it was destruction nonetheless. Every time Gaara destroyed a tree, Naruto would mutter, "Wow." Every time he sent a wave of sand surging, he would say, "Amazing," and his smile would get wider. Each swipe of Gaara's bestial paws left a scar gouged into the ground. For hours now this guy was tearing away at the forest, roaring, ripping, and sending wave after wave of sand without restraint. This guy is a cage? Naruto turned to her quicker than a startled owl. He scrunched his brows sternly. "Of course he is, don't sound like that." She shrugged, just saying, "He seems a bit pathetic." Whether it was from Yugito's comment or not, Gaara suddenly stopped rampaging. From their perch in the tree they could see his broad shoulders move up and down with his heavy breathing. Naruto cupped his hands around his mouth. "You feel better, buddy?" he yelled. Gaara turned to him swiftly like a tiger and roared. They could feel the wind whip their hair back. "No then? Cool, cool, I'll wait," he replied. Yugito laughed. "Wuss," she said. "Hag," he shot back. "Girly man. Tomboy." Yugito gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. "You don't mean that." Naruto crossed his arms and turned the other way. "Yeah, I do." He was then roughly shoved out of the tree, landing hard on his ass. "Ow, fuck." He stood up, rubbing his ass. That was such a tomboyish move. The comment only made Yugito's face tomato red with anger. "Naruto." Gaara's voice boomed. As Naruto turned he could see Gaara's giant form stalking towards him. But as he walked his upper body slowly lost its definition and the brown flesh engulfing it fell down to the ground as dark brown sand, revealing the normal Gaara in his normal attire. Of course this made Naruto happy. Now he could actually have a conversation with the guy, but on the other hand that meant no more destructive entertainment. "Now do you feel better?" Gaara didn't respond at all to Naruto's question, he just kept walking towards him. "Okay then, how do you feel?" When Gaara was only a foot away he grabbed Naruto by the throat. "Tell me what you did, or else I will kill you," he said in that low chilling killer's voice he'd perfected. The sand that fell from his body swirled around Naruto now. "This time I will give you no chances, speak." Hey look, I know you're angry, be you. Speak." Naruto sighed. "You're right, sorry." He stared at Yugito until she got the hint and approached them, although she did stay a few yards away from them. Gaara was volatile right now. Yugito meet Gaara. Gaara meet Yugito. Introductions over? Okay then, guess I've got some explaining to do now, huh?
That's all for now. If you want to see next part, then please like this video and subscribe my channel. Thank you.